morning, everyone. Wait for my fellow board colleagues to pop on camera here. And Mr. Lawfer, Ms. Townsend, are we ready to begin, or are there any other issues to resolve quickly?
Michael, I'm not sure what's going on in the room, so you would need to.
After an exciting morning, we are all good to go, and we are streaming out on the Cali PA as well as YouTube web services.
Great, thank you, Mr. Lawfer. Well, good morning again, everyone. My name is Joaquin Esquivel. I'm chair of the State Water Board. Today is Tuesday, March 16th. It is 9 a.m., and I would like to call this meeting to order. I'll begin by introducing my fellow board colleagues. With me today is Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo, Board Member Tam Dodak, Board Member Sean McGuire, and Board Member Laurel Firestone. I'd like to also introduce our executive staff. With us is our Executive Director, Eileen Sobek, our two Chief Deputies, Jonathan Bishop and Eric Oppenheimer, our Chief Counsel, Michael Lawfer. Our Clerk of the Board is Janine Townsend, and assisting to her is Courtney Tyler. So as you know, this meeting is being webcast and recorded. In order to comply with the governor's physical distancing requirements and as authorized in executive orders, we don't actually have a physical meeting room today, nor have we had one for going on a year now. But nonetheless, we're here on the Zoom platform. You're either viewing us customarily through our YouTube or Cali PA video feed. And if you are planning on commenting on any of today's items, you should be here on the Zoom platform with us. At the top of the agenda this morning are instructions on how to contact the clerk of the board and receive a link. You can also email comment letters at waterboards.ca.gov. And if you need assistance in getting onto the platform here, and again, if you so wish to speak. Once you're here on the platform, you will be muted and your camera will be turned off until it is your time to speak on the item that you have requested to speak on. And please do state your name and affiliation if you have one when you come up to place your comments. As many of you know, we start off customarily here with public forum, where any member of the public wishing to address the board on an item not pending for the board can do so. And so we can move on into public comment. And I believe this morning we have two public commenters. And so first up, we have Mr. Doug Obiji. Good morning, Mr. Obiji.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Other board members and staff, my name is Doug Obiji. I'm a senior attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council. And I'm here today to request that the board require the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Water Resources by March 31st to submit alternative operations plans that will fully implement water quality standards in the Delta and will provide adequate water temperatures for salmon in below upstream reservoirs, which will also help ensure that California is better prepared if next year is dry. This request follows up on a letter that we sent to the board as well as to our state and federal agency partners on Friday, and really highlights the need to take immediate action to prevent a repeat of the disastrous conditions in 2014 and 2015, when we lost temperature control below upstream reservoirs and decimated endangered winter run Chinook salmon, as well as fall run Chinook salmon, which are the backbone of the state's salmon fishery. And we violated water quality standards through temporary urgency change petitions, effectively changing the standards and worsening water quality in the Delta that has led to harmful algal blooms, increased salinity, and other community impacts. Unfortunately, as of today, as of last month, I should say, under the 90% exceedance forecast, the dry operations forecast that the Bureau of Reclamation and DWR prepare, they are planning to drain storage in upstream reservoirs in Oroville and Shasta to levels like those seen in 2014 and 2015. That's a real problem, not just for salmon that spawn below the dams, but it's also for all of us if next year is dry, because it means that we do not have a lot of water in storage in order to be able to make deliveries for farms and cities, as well as maintaining water quality and protections for fish and wildlife. Similarly, the Bureau of Reclamation has indicated that if March remains dry, they may seek temporary urgency change petitions to allow them to violate Delta water quality standards. This is really unfortunate, and it really indicates, I think, a failure by the Central Valley Project and State Water Project to prepare for drought. We have been repeatedly requesting that they analyze and consider the effects of these kinds of drought waivers in future droughts, and they've refused to do so in the context of their Endangered Species Act and CISA permits. Unfortunately, the board thus gets thrust into this bad position of having to play the grown-up and encourage the agencies and enforce the agencies to take action now so that we can prevent more disastrous conditions later in the year. The time to act really is now, because the Central Valley Project will start making extensive deliveries for irrigated agriculture along Sacramento River the middle or end of April. It takes a while to start these planning processes, and obviously it's important to have transparency and public opportunity for comment as we look at alternative operations. And so that is why we've asked the board to take action now and to ask the feds and the state to come up with more protective operations so that they can be considered. And that needs to consider reductions in deliveries to their senior contractors. Right now, the Bureau and DWR are planning to make deliveries not just to their water service contractors, but also to their senior water supply contractors for a total of about 5 million acre feet of water this year. That also needs to look at things like hydropower bypasses that can improve water temperature management without improving storage. And it really needs to come back to the board to look at the trade-offs that are involved. We're not suggesting what the right answer is, but the need to act is now. And so we are hopeful that the board will take action, following up on the board's extensive authority under both Water Rights Order 90-5 and D1641 to prevent a repeat of 2014 and 2015. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Obiji. Appreciated the letter. And as you can imagine, the board has been in discussion with the projects, and we continue to try to see how we're going to navigate certainly dry conditions, but really appreciate your engagement here, and do know that we're committed to having that conversation. I think this board has talked previously about our drought work and needing to have those conversations earlier up in the water year when there are still options. And so appreciate the letter, and thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next, we have Brandon Thompson. And then after that, I believe Joaquin is here to make public comment as well. Good morning, Mr. Thompson.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Chairman, board members, and everyone in attendance today, virtually or however you may be getting the message. My name is Brandon. I am coming to you from Bakersfield, California. I'm a mural artist, and I'm here today. I wanted to share something fun with you that happened in our hometown here along our dry riverbeds in the Kern River. Okay, so first off, a little background. When I left after high school, I went to the Air Force, active duty. And when I came back 17 years later, I noticed there's a huge change as far as what was going on. This is my first time speaking on behalf of, the people in the community as far as what's going on with our dry riverbeds here in Bakersfield. But we hired his name is Andres Amador back in February to come in, and we did a 2-day installation. And you can see the name of the art installation is called Flow. And as you can see, we gathered a bunch of dry vegetation, leaves, and different shrubbery and things from our riverbeds. And we basically just took and created these cool flowy effects, if you guys can see it. This is an aerial shot, okay? I basically just wanted to bring awareness to what was going on here, because me personally, when I came back to the town, I noticed that in the past, this specific area was an area where we would have barbecues, family gatherings, and things of that sort. And I've had family members and folks in the community that went other places along the riverbed and have unfortunately passed away because we couldn't enjoy the riverbeds near our hometown. So as you guys are all aware of that. But really, what I've seen is that they've been kind of infested with homelessness encampments, and it's also invites illegal dumping. And so really, I'm just here to, as an artist, to let you know the vandalism that's going on in these areas as well. And for whatever it's worth, please consider restoring the water to our Bakersfield area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Really appreciate you taking the time this morning and addressing the board. And thank you for sharing the art installation as well. Really appreciate the time and advocacy you're putting to it.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. That wraps up public forum currently. And so thank you everyone that took time this morning to address the board. Oh, yes. Oh, I apologize. Yes, Mr. Lawfer, I believe there's a Joaquin here for comment as well.
Yes, and Joaquin, you should be able to share your screen now, or share your camera, and your is live.
Good morning. Apologies for almost skipping over you there.
It's all right. I'm 5'3". I'm easily skipped over. Am I good right now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Good morning.
All right, thanks a lot, bro. First of all, I appreciate everybody here. Good morning to all. Yeah, so my thing is, and you know what, I already thought I knew what I was going to talk about, and then I just heard the brother speak right now, man, and just touched my freaking heart, man, because he said as an artist, he's seen the trash instead of water, you know, I mean, gosh, you know, yeah. So we were there. I was there the other day in a car wash. I mean, the car show on Beach Park last week, and I saw a crew up there with trash bags, and I ran up there and I told my buddy from the car show, I said, I'm out of here, man. I'm gonna go do that over there, you know. And yeah, I started cleaning up and met the brother Jonathan Yates right there. And so, anyways, gosh, man, you know, I live in Lamont, you know, right there. There's only a canal. And I go to Bakersfield and just see more canal by the bluffs, and it's not a woe is me thing at all, bro. This is not any kind of woe is me, because I could have fun in a desert. I could have fun just trapped inside a room all day long, you know. I'm okay anywhere I go, but it's the thing here is like, what's the difference? You know, the difference, you know, of things, you know, as in regards to either having a river or, like the brother said, just seeing trash and encampments, you know. It'd be nice, you know, it'd be nice to get things back to like the 80s. We also have a big family. We used to always go there with our kids and stuff, you know, kids in the family. In regards to the difference between that and just taking a walk on the bank and looking down and kids seeing what they're seeing these days, you know, it's just a huge difference. I mean, I don't know what the legal issues are, bro. I don't know what the reasons are. I have no idea what the reasons are why the water's not there. It's all this comes down to is consideration. You know, that's all it comes down to, bro, is consideration. And that's all I could ask for, you know, and it'd be nice.
Thank you, Joaquin. I really appreciate you speaking to us from the heart this morning about the river and taking the time. Really, really do appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. I appreciate everyone here.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the time and addressing this morning, Joaquin.
Thank you. Thank you. See you.
Well, great. Thank you. That wraps up then public forum, and really do appreciate the comments this morning from folks addressing the board and certainly speaking from the heart on some critical matters, certainly to communities in Bakersfield. We've heard about the river for a few months now, and just do appreciate the community continuing to come out and advocate. And that then, again, wraps up public forum. I appreciate everyone. And we can now move on to our first item, which is adoption of board meeting minutes from March 2nd. Any comments and or otherwise a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Board Member Firestone. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Townsend, can you please call the roll call vote?
Yes. Board Member Firestone?
Aye.
Board Member, Vice Chair Diadamo?
Aye.
Board Member McGuire?
Aye.
Board Member Dodek?
Aye.
And Chair Esquivel?
Abstain.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. And do want to acknowledge, thank you, Vice Chair Diadamo, for running the last board meeting. It went very well and appreciate it. Thank you. All right, that will then bring us to our tranche of uncontested items. Ms. Townsend, are items number 2 and 3 still uncontested or don't have commenters?
There is no comment cards.
Great, thank you. Unless any board members would like to go ahead and pull one of the items for discussion or hearing, they can be taken up as an uncontested tranche, and would entertain a motion.
I'll move to adopt items 2 and 3.
I will second.
Thank you both. Ms. Townsend, can you please call the roll call vote?
Certainly. Board Member McGuire,
Aye.
Board Member Dodek,
Aye.
Board Member Firestone,
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo,
Aye.
and Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Really do want to acknowledge and give thanks to the Division of Financial Assistance on item number 2 and continuing to ensure that we're finding, resources for our state match and continuing to expand the financial capacity we have to really get projects in the ground. And definitely as well, a thanks to Region number 7 and their Basin Plan Amendment. Well, thank you. With that, we can now move on to item number 4, which is a consideration of a proposed resolution adopting the prioritization of drinking water regulations for this year. And I believe Mr. Polhamus will join us here to kick off the item. Good morning.
And I think Ms. Hall is going to take the lead on this particular item, and she should now have control of her microphone and camera.
Yes, good morning. Next slide, please. Since not all of us have video or will be speaking this morning, the slides to show you the faces of those staff who under ordinary conditions would be sitting up at the staff table or in the first row and available to answer questions. Clockwise from the upper left-hand corner, we have me. My name is Melissa Hall. I'm a senior engineer with the Regulatory Development Unit in the Division of Drinking Water. Next is Darren Polhamus, as the Division of Drinking Water's Deputy Director. Randy Bernard, Supervising Engineer for our Technical Operations Section, and Robert Brownwood, Principal Engineer and Branch Chief for DDW's Program Management Branch. Next slide, please. I'm going to start by reviewing progress on the 2020 priorities, followed by proposed priorities for this year, and finishing with a preview of future year priorities. Next slide. While not all items on our priorities list for a given year will be completed in that year, we do want to review some regulation packages from last year's priority list that have been completed. The Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program regulations were adopted last year, have been fully approved by the Office of Administrative Law, and are in effect as of January 1st this year. The revised perchlorate detection limit for purposes of reporting and revised total coliformal regulations have been adopted and are working their way through the Department of Finance and Office of Administrative Law review processes. And the microplastics definition was adopted last June. Next slide. Now for this year's priorities, at the very top of the list is the hexavalent chromium maximum contaminant level. The Sacramento Superior Court invalidated the California Department of Public Health 2014 hexavalent chromium MCL, which was removed from the California Code of Regulations in fall 2017. The court ordered the board to adopt a new MCL in compliance with Health and Safety Code Section 116365 regarding economic feasibility, paying particular attention to compliance alternatives for small water systems and their users, and setting the MCL as close to the public health goal as is economically feasible. Because analyzing economic feasibility is at the foundation of developing the revised MCL, a review of various options and the ways that we might consider it, especially for the multitude of small water systems we have in California, was undertaken last year. A white paper describing the findings was issued for public comment in March 2020, followed by a webcast workshop in April. Preliminary occurrence data was released last October, with treatment cost estimates released in November, and 2 webcast workshops on cost estimates held in December. Staff are following up on oral and written comments received regarding cost estimates and best available technologies, and are projecting notice of proposed rulemaking issuance for early to midsummer. Next slide, please. Second on the list is the lead and copper rule. For background, fixtures and plumbing materials are the primary sources of these contaminants. Regulation is based on percentages of sampled homes exceeding action levels rather than MCLs, with complaints assessed at the tap. If action levels are exceeded at more than 10% of tap samples, the water system must take actions to evaluate the exceedances, control corrosion, and inform the public. The US EPA's 1991 lead and copper rule has been revised 3 times now, most recently in January. when EPA promulgated long-term revisions to the rule. The new regulations came with a 3-year timeline for compliance. However, they're currently under review by the new administration, with final effective and compliance dates still uncertain. Next slide, please. Some of the key changes include the addition of school and child care facility sampling requirements. Sampling would occur at least once over a 5-year period, or an average of 20% of facilities sampled each year. There are new tap sampling procedures, including sampling the 5th liter at lead service lines and using wide mouth sample bottles for sample collection. There's now a lead trigger level at 10 micrograms per liter to prompt reevaluation of corrosion control, and requirements for lead service line inventories and replacements for the entire service line, including the customer side, as well as new public notification requirements. There are many more changes. These are just examples here. While the federal revisions are under review, staff are participating in national implementation work groups and evaluating the most efficient means to pursue primary enforcement authority, or primacy for this rule, while also potentially making state-specific modifications to further enhance public health protection. Next slide, please.
Ms. Hall, before you transition, just I did see that there was news from the current US EPA about potentially, I believe, pulling back the lead and copper rule and reworking that. Does that impact at all our work on the lead and copper side? Are we waiting for a little more clarity there? Just trying to get a sense.
Darren may have some additional details, but the federal administration is reviewing the rule, and they've got a set delay on that right now with an option for an additional delay, and they could change the requirements going forward, but we're continuing to participate in the national work groups because there are enough things that we need to clarify and figure out how to go forward on that's a good thing to continue doing right now. And I see Darren's got his camera on, so he can provide some additional details.
Yeah, I can add a little bit more. We're obviously in discussions, as was tracking this, as are the other states. So they've basically just put a bit of a delay in to do a further review until July of this coming year, I believe. And so it's like a 6-month review period. It's not expected that they would, make major changes, because then they would have to restart the process over again. So whatever minor changes they proposed would take effect by December, and the clock would start then. So it gives us a little bit of time to continue to work through the issues here in California. So we'll take the breather room and we'll see what other considerations they add as they go along. But I think we still need to keep working hard on this one. It's the most complicated rule we have in the safe drinking water arena. So the extra time will be useful for us.
Thank you, Mr. Wilhelmus. Really, really helpful. Appreciate it. And thank you, Ms. Hall.
Okay. In the meantime, other continuing efforts to evaluate lead exposure include back in early 2017, we had permit amendments issued to about 1,200 community water systems serving at least one school. The amendments required the water system, as requested by the school, to meet with school staff to develop a lead sampling plan and collect up to 5 samples from regularly used faucets or drinking fountains at the school, and then report the sample results back to the school. Assembly Bill 746 required community water systems to test drinking water lead levels at all California public kindergarten through 12th grade school sites constructed before January 2010. Schools are required to notify parents of elevated lead levels and take immediate steps to make those faucets inoperable. To date, samples have been collected at 41,638 school sample sites representing over 8,000 schools. 0.4% of sample locations had results over the action level of 15 parts per billion. Approximately 4% of samples tested between 5 and 15 parts per billion, and the remainder tested at less than 5. Under Senate Bill 1398, community water systems were required to compile an inventory of known partial or total lead user service lines by July 1st of 2018 and identify where the service line material is unknown. Based on last year's annual reports, 15 systems identified lead in their service lines. Of those, only 1 had lead pipe, with the others having lead fittings. 112 water systems reported unknown service line or fitting material. And for all user service lines constructed of either lead or unknown material, water systems were required to propose a schedule to replace them by last July. We're expecting to have a map of the replacement plans available online soon. 2018 legislation also imposed several requirements on the Department of Social Services relative to lead in drinking water at child daycare centers located in buildings constructed before 2010. These required coordination with the drinking water program regarding receipt and posting of lead results. They also require social services to consult with us on development of their own regulations for lead monitoring. And back in 2019, we recommended an action level to social services of 5 parts per billion and a detection limit for purposes of reporting of 1 part per billion for child daycare centers. Next slide, please.
Hey, Ms. Hall, can we just while we're still on lead, do you mind going back one? I just going through these things, I just have quick questions. So for the school sampling, I know that there was a website where people could go and look at the results, I believe. Is there still kind of a public portal to be able to see the results of what's been conducted so far?
Yes, I think so. And again, Darren is ready to answer with more details.
Yeah, it's still available. As last I checked, we intended to leave it up, and it should still be there.
And is there still, I know it says school sampling till for those 2 years, is there still the requirement or ability to have water systems conduct sampling if requested by the school? Or is that?
Yes, that's a good question. So the bulk of the program's done. The period for which it's gone through is done. There are still some schools that didn't test, and we should also just mention as well that this was publicly operated schools, not privately owned schools. They were not included in the requirement, although some private schools did opt themselves in. They could do that. Not all of them did. We certainly encourage them to stay in touch with their water system and do it, but as far as the period of the legislation, that period has expired. And I would note that is a difference in the new upcoming federal proposal, is that there would be ongoing testing routinely every 5 years at schools, where this program we did was kind of a one pass.
Right. Okay, great, thank you. I have other questions just on this slide. Then on the lead service line inventory, I know that there are a lot of concerns about partial line replacement and how that might impact households where they have on their premises lead or on the customer side some lead infrastructure, and that line service or line replacement within the distribution system might impact that for some, I think, period of time. Can you just give a little, and Darren, these probably are all questions for you, but can you just give a little background on where we are on that and how we're dealing with that concern?
Yeah, sure. So from our standpoint, we included in our frequently asked questions and our instructions to the water systems that constructing on the one side, the water system side, and replacing the lead service lines there, that they needed to make every effort they could to look on the private side and inform the user if they thought there was lead on their side as well, because obviously it's very well documented that disturbing during the replacement on one side can accelerate the lead release because of the movement of the line and the loosening of the scale that's in there for the corrosion control in the lead pipe if a water system's using that. So to our knowledge, water systems have been making sure that they check those sides when they do the replacements. But in California, this is a much lower threat than other states. There's seems to be very few incidences of true lead service lines, both on the private and the public side. That doesn't mean they don't exist, but we don't have large numbers of them. There's the threats there, but it's minimal compared to other parts of the country where it is an extreme threat. And the new regulations coming into place from the federal government do have specific requirements for water systems when they do the replacements. Those aren't in our current law. And so that would be one of the updates we need to add, is to add those requirements to the water systems and, to match the federal requirements associated with what their actual duties are regarding notifying the owner, coordinating a replacement so both the private side and the user side can be replaced at the same time. Now, we believe most systems are doing that on their own now, but of course, it would be good to have that in regulation to make sure that does happen.
Okay, great. Okay, and it sounds like those are all things that, like you said, are part of the, are kind of teed up for things we're going to be either that are being addressed through that need to be adjusted due to the federal rule change, or we're looking at on our own within this whole rulemaking.
I might add as well that those that have been paying attention to our inventory that was submitted by the water systems, that there have been numerous changes in the numbers. So when we initially did that, we definitely made the ruling that unknowns were considered lead until proven otherwise, so that was a clear message that they needed to either find out or deal with it. So a lot of those water systems, since the adoption of their plans going forward, have discovered that a lot of their unknowns are not lead, and so those are coming off the inventory. And then there are some water systems that are proactively removing some of their lead connectors. It's mostly been the gooseneck connectors, part of their, a smaller piece of lead plumbing, not a large pipe, but still a threat. And so those numbers are there as well. But largely the numbers that have gone down dramatically have been understanding either that they, had it unknown or misidentified it, which is good. They were cautious and proceeded through their process.
Great. Okay. Thanks so much.
All right. Moving on to the third on our list is cross-connection control. Cross connections are defined in the regulations as an unprotected actual or potential connection between a potable water system used to supply water for drinking purposes and any source or system containing unapproved water or a substance that is not or cannot be approved as safe, wholesome, and potable. The purpose of cross-connection control is to reduce the possibility of a foreign substance entering the water system. Assembly Bill 1671 modified the Health and Safety Code to require development of revised regulations by January 1st, 2020. So we're running a little behind schedule here, and provides that these regulations may be done by policy handbook without going through the regular rulemaking process, but with at least 2 public hearings. The regulations would consist of 2 components. The first would be the update and replacement of existing cross-connection control regulations. The second is development of cross-connection control specialist and tester certification criteria. A public workshop was held early last year to solicit input, and draft standards were released for public review late last month. We've got 1 public workshop on the draft scheduled for the middle of April, with another to be scheduled sometime before board consideration in late summer.
Sorry, Ms. Hall, can I just
go ahead?
Sorry to keep interrupting. So I realized on each of these, it's so helpful because you have some more specifics like this on next steps and timing. Can you just, for lead, go back and, or you don't have to go back a slide, but just what's sort of the next opportunity for, or the focus, I guess, this year in particular, 2021, around the work on the lead rulemaking or lead and copper?
Right. Okay. So for lead and copper rule, right now we've got various staff. We've got, there's maybe a dozen work groups. I can't remember with ASTWA on different topics. So public notification, education. What do they mean? Can we get waivers if we're states that have already done sampling of schools? What does that mean? How does that fit into the new regulation structure? But there's just a lot of different topics to cover. The data management, how we're going to deal with all of this. So we've got staff broken up. So we've got almost all of I think we've got all the work groups covered. California's on every single work group at this point. And we're trying to make sure that we've got all of our questions answered so that we know what we're fully getting into. And we're working as though the adopted regulations or the promulgated regulations are going to go into effect, because there's a lot of pre-work before the deadlines and the regulations anyway. And then we're looking at what's the most efficient way to get primacy. We've got this backlog of primacy packages, which is another item later on. So we're trying to figure out what's the most efficient way. Do we to proceed with that, and then looking at are there additional things that while we're at it that we can do to provide additional public health protection. So we're looking hard at the lead data for California in particular, what we've got so far and how it fits in, and but we don't have a deadline right now for starting rulemaking or for something that's going to come up in front of the board like in the next year or so, because we've got to get through that process first.
Right. Okay. So it sounds
next
like
year I should have some actual times for you.
Okay, perfect. That's really helpful. So a lot of this is staff work, really engaging on getting ready for a more specific kind of public process around what we would be doing.
Yes.
In a following year.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Okay. Direct potable reuse is next on the list. Direct potable reuse is the planned introduction of recycled water directly into a public water system or into a raw water supply immediately upstream of a water treatment plant. In other words, with no significant environmental buffer. AB 574 established a statutory mandate to adopt uniform water recycling criteria for raw water augmentation by December 2023, as well as requiring that certain public health research be completed before adopting these criteria. As required by statute, a proposed framework for regulating direct potable reuse projects was presented to the board as an information item back in June 2018, with an update provided in September 2019. The board approved funding for a research panel last December, and we've got five research projects have been completed and submitted and are under review by staff. While work on the overall regulatory approach is still in progress, there's a continued need for supporting research on various health impacts, but draft regulations will be posted and available for public comment later this month, and initial stakeholder outreach is planned for next month. Next slide, please. Microplastics are a contaminant class of emerging concern for which there's no current regulatory standard either at the state or federal level. In 2018, Senate Bill 1422 added a section to the Health and Safety Code to require this board to develop monitoring and reporting requirements for microplastics in drinking water, starting with the definition by July 1st of last year and followed by adoption of a standard analytical methodology, adoption of requirements for 4 years of testing and reporting of drinking water microplastics levels, including public disclosure of results, consideration of a notification level or other consumer guidance, and accreditation of qualified laboratories for analysis using the adopted analytical method or methods, all by July 1st of this year. For this work, the state board is authorized to implement these requirements through adoption of a policy handbook that's exempt from the regular rulemaking process. The definition was adopted on time at last year's June 16th board meeting. For the remaining work, we're running a little over a month behind due to some COVID-related lab closures with the method development and validation and review. Health effects information has been streaming in, so we're still evaluating whether we'll be able to propose a notification level or some other sort of health information. But we're well underway with getting the ELAP program staff toward training to be able to offer accreditation for the method. And Darren has been heavily involved with this, so he may be able to add details if somebody is interested. But we did have more than 30 participating labs from 7 countries, including both expert specialists in this area and interested municipal and commercial laboratories. Next slide, please. Per and polyfluorinated substances, or PFAS, are contaminants of emerging concern that have been getting a lot of attention lately. While we've included them in the list of priority rulemaking work, it will likely be another year or so before formal rulemaking on maximum contaminant levels can take place. But this is where we start with monitoring and notification of response levels. In July 2018, the Deputy Director for the Division of Drinking Water issued interim notification and response levels for perfluorooctanoic acid, or PFOA, and perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, PFAS. In August 2019, based on a recommendation from the Office of Environmental Health Hazards Assessment, or OEHA, the division updated the notification levels and requested that OEHA develop public health goals for these contaminants. Early last year, the director lowered the response levels for PFOA and PFAS and requested that OEHA prepare notification level recommendations for 7 other PFAS compounds found through water system monitoring. In January, OEHA provided a recommendation for one of these compounds, and a couple of weeks ago, the director issued notification and response levels for perfluorobutane sulfonic acid, or PFBS. The Division of Drinking Water is continuing to investigate the extensive contamination of these and other PFAS materials in drinking water sources throughout the state. In 2019, orders to perform 4 quarters of monitoring were issued for approximately 600 source water wells. Based on the monitoring results from that order, general orders were issued last fall for about 900 wells located near prior detections, and earlier this month to address Department of Defense sites. Future monitoring actions would be informed by data collected at wastewater treatment and chromium plating facilities, as well as bulk fuel terminals and refineries. This information will all be used to determine whether DDW should request that OEHA develop public health goals for any additional PFAS compounds, what public exposure there is, and how much water might require treatment, which would all inform potential future regulation development. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Ms. Hall, can I have a question about the PFAS slide?
Sure.
Well, first, I'm just wondering if we have any sense of timing from OEHA on public health goals that we've requested, just to get some sense of that. I know that's always subject to change, but wondering if they've given any kind of estimate.
I can address that. So they should be releasing a draft PHG very shortly. I would expect any time. They were actually very close at the end of last year, December timeframe, but obviously new studies are coming out all the time and they want to reevaluate based on that information. They've taken that to do that. And so hopefully though, they come to conclusion soon and get their draft out. That would then preliminary, my guesstimate would be, they should be able to complete and deliver a PHG around the end of 2021. So we could begin a MCL process on our side around January or the beginning of 2022. As you know, it generally takes, and I would expect about 18 months process for our work on that. So I would guess at this moment in time, the earliest we would see an MCL would be the summer of 2023.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
that's really helpful.
To clarify, that would be just for the PFOA and the PFOS at this point, not any of the others, because those are the PHGs they're working on at the moment.
Right. Okay, thank you. And I'm wondering, and if you can't answer this now, that's fine. But I'm wondering, given that so many water systems are kind of working through even just the notification and response level adjustments and, understanding what their options are. And I think getting concerns from their customers around what this means. How are we supporting water systems in the interim while we don't have an MCL, and thinking about, to the extent that they are investing in treatment, that how are we supporting them in informing how they might think about anticipating and thinking about kind of treatment train and investments that are going on now. And obviously we don't know the public health goal in the MCL, but just in terms of supporting kind of long range planning or even more immediate planning on investments that water systems are making now in response.
Yes, several water systems are underway on pilot testing. Several are working to install treatment systems. We're working closely with them just through our normal permitting process for when they bring on any kind of treatment in their system. So we're closely helping, and they're teaching us, and we're teaching, or working with them as they go through their pilot process and understand what the treatment effectivenesses are. And one of our concerns is to make sure that they aren't simply focused on PFOA and PFOS, although it is obviously one of the bigger health concerns at the moment, that the short chain ones and what their water system treatments they're proposing will do in consideration of those in the future. And to my knowledge, all of them are also investigating that as they proceed. So.
Great. Thank you.
So I have a quick follow-on question, Mr. Polhemus. So it sounds like, obviously the more we continue this investigation, the more we find. And obviously that it's troubling and concerning. And I'm glad to hear that a lot of water systems are moving forward with, trying to look at treatment options. Not all will be able to afford it at this point. So I appreciate the comments from Board Member Firestone as well, just starting to think through that type of assistance we can provide. But on the regulatory front, I think we've also heard quite a bit recently from Congress and from the federal government in terms of increased interest in moving forward with regulations on the federal side for these compounds. So I was just wondering if you had an update on that. 2023 for a state MCL for the first two, is a ways away. So what are you hearing on the federal side for this?
Yeah, certainly. So from the federal side, what we understand to be happening is a couple actions. They've obviously did say that they were making a regulatory determination to begin developing MCLs for PFOA and PFOS based on UCMR3 data and the process they go through for that. Although they have not released any kind of timeline associated with when that would take place. Looking at their past time frames associated with the developing MCLs, which they have not done all that many since the 1996 amendments, but they generally took on average about 5 years for them to complete. They wrestle with much larger data sets for all 50 states and have a broader consideration. Then each state has to make in their own MCL determination. They've also now added, excuse me, to UCMR 5, basically requesting 29 PFASs will be included in that round of testing. Now, UCMR 5 data won't be available until 2026. And then, of course, there would be a process for making a regulatory determination after that and a process associated with doing that. So if you kind of do the math, you're looking at potentially the other PFAS materials that they could consider doing MCLs for would be around 2030. Of course, that could all change if they figure out some way to accelerate it or Congress enact some legislation to make that faster. But kind of going on using their past performance on different MCLs and just kind of what is in front of them, that's the time frame we see them on. From my understanding from my participation in national organizations, all the states in the nation are pretty far ahead of EPA at this point. Although we're all using their health-derived data, they're the ones that are doing and sponsoring largely the health-based studies that all the states are using in their MCLs. So they are contributing in that fashion, but I don't believe that they're going to catch up to us in the near term associated with putting MCLs in place for the PFOA and PFOS and the others.
Okay, that's helpful. I just think it's important to keep in mind the time frame. Even though it does seem years down the road just for the first two, and we're potentially dealing here with PFAS, several thousand PFAS substances, it does feel like an overwhelming task before us. But I think it's good that we keep the momentum and keep moving towards protecting human health where we can here, and not necessarily waiting. And we'll just have to see where our federal partners take it on their side. So thank you.
Yeah, we're definitely excited that they're engaging in this in a different fashion now. And like I said, they can figure out ways to accelerate that, but they are contributing to our work as well through some of the efforts they're doing. So
absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, board member. Those are good points. And, to the extent that there are resources rather on the federal side, it is helpful to know if they're going to be able to catch up with us, and sounding like likely not, but we'll continue to engage with them. I will flag that I think it's why it's even more important that we've already moved ahead with notification levels for PFBS, just because those shorter chain compounds, and we start to at least get some benefit of kind of better capturing than the various sizes, which it's I think partly what depends on treatment here are the size of the PFAS chains themselves and their ability to slip through and otherwise be treated by things like activated granular carbon, GAR, and other things. So anyway.
I would just add too, Melissa did mention it, but I think it deserves repeating that, we did ask OEHA for 7, and we've got the PFBS, so 6 remaining notification level recommendations. They have indicated previously that we could expect to see those around the end of 2021 as well at this point.
Yeah, the only other thing that I think maybe worth, just flagging, and I think it does, kind of complement the 2 points here. It's, how do we get at it at a technical and financial basis? How do we actually resolve the issue? But then how do we also, advance the regulatory work? And the 2 of those kind of converging is that, I would just flag that I know Orange County and others have lawsuits out already. So when we talk about these substances, there are responsible parties out there, and that there are states that have also been leading the charge and trying to ensure that all the cost of cleanup of these contaminants aren't just borne on communities, but responsible parties are found appropriately. So, how do we kind of address it from all sides to make sure that we do have a comprehensive response is, I think, part of it. And here, this isn't even the division of water qualities work, which we know really complements a lot of this division of drinking water work.
Sorry, I have one more question. On the monitoring orders, can you just remind me what level of water systems we're issuing that towards? Especially, I'm curious, especially on the small ones that often aren't within unregulated contaminants, aren't often subject to that. So just, yeah.
Sure. So we did take a different approach than the UCMR takes. UCMR, you're correct, focuses on larger water systems, and it includes a random sampling of the smaller ones. However, our orders have been contaminant expectation based, the term it. So near places we considered there would be potential contamination, and it included all public water systems, no matter the size, that were within proximity to those potential contaminating sources. So we didn't distinguish. We did at times work with some of the smaller water systems that were struggling to make the tests, some of the really small ones, maybe waiving their ability to, there was a running 4-quarter test in the first instance, and then some ongoing testing. And we do allow them to opt out at certain points once they've demonstrated, we believe, that there isn't a PFAS component, so that they don't have to run the full gamut of testing. But that's been very limited. Most water systems have complied with the order and given us great data and contributed to what's going on.
And just given how we're continuing to find more and more and issuing more orders on the water quality side, so are we expanding the orders that we're requesting of water systems as we get more information on occurrence nearby? What's the process for that?
Yeah, so we did, between the very first order and then the second order that was issued, expand based on what we understood at that point. And then we've added the third order, which brings in near Department of Defense present and formerly operated sites as kind of a first round around those. We haven't, continued. It's not, the orders do not have continuous expansion built in, so the orders have to be amended to do that. So as we're analyzing data from the second order, there would be a contemplation in the future of expanding that, as you suggest, but it doesn't automatically happen.
Right. Yeah. But you've been doing that on a regular basis as we've, in the past few that we've done. Okay, great. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
So a question for Mr. Pohemus. Sorry, I had to step away for a moment, so this might have been covered already. But has there been any progress either by us, OEHA, or any other entities that you know of in terms of looking at PFAS as a class?
It is a very vigorously debated and studied component, but there isn't really any news to announce yet on whether that's something that's viable in the future. It's certainly understood that with the potential for the thousands of combinations of potential PFAS and the easily ability to reformulate, once one has an MCL, to reformulate something similar to it, that is kind of a future question to be answered, but unfortunately we don't have a great indication. I guess I would say the only kind of early indication I do have is that there are, from the health reports, different health endpoints for different materials, which would indicate that it's not uniform across all PFASs of the health impact they potentially have. So I wouldn't expect to see one class, but we do hold out hope that we could still group them into subgroups and lump some of them together. And so that work is still underway. We just don't know the results of that yet.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate the discussion.
Right. The next item on the priority list, and this is new for this year, are metal detection limits for purposes of reporting, or DLRs. In conducting the most recent MCL, and as discussed in previous priority presentations, staff found that approximately 1/3 of the contaminants for which we currently have MCLs have detection limits for purposes of reporting set at higher concentrations than their corresponding public health goals. For those contaminants, staff's ability to evaluate public exposure between the public health goal and DLR is limited, as is the ability to evaluate the economic and technological feasibility of lowering the MCL. So staff's been coordinating with the Environmental Laboratory Technical Advisory Committee, or LTAC, to identify reporting limitations of analytical methods and to evaluate laboratory capacity and costs for reporting to lower concentrations. As staff determined that lower reporting levels can be achieved with adequate lab capacity, we're proposing revising the DLRs to allow collection of data to better inform the MCL review process. In a preliminary laboratory survey from last year, we had prioritized lead, which has a public health goal of 0.2 parts per billion. Based on the results we're seeing so far, we expect to be able to lower the lead DLR from its current 5 parts per billion to 1 part per billion and still have ample laboratory capacity. So we're planning to notice that and present it to the board later this year, along with DLR revisions as part of the same package for a few other metals that are picked up by the same suite of analytical methods. While we haven't ruled out any particular metals just yet, the most promising candidates appear to be antimony, arsenic, cadmium, lead, of course, mercury, nickel, and thallium. Next slide, please. Primacy packages. These are for all of the federal rules. California has been granted primary enforcement responsibility for the Safe Drinking Water Act, known as Primacy, by US EPA for California public water systems. To maintain primacy, we must promulgate legally enforceable regulations for California that are no less stringent than federal regulations. To demonstrate this to EPA, states submit primacy packages for each federal rule, confirming the enforceability of the state regulations and including a crosswalk to show how adopted state regulations align with all provisions of the federal regulations. California currently has a backlog of primacy packages, and clearing this backlog is a high priority for EPA. EPA Region 9 staff have recently provided formal and informal comments on several primacy packages, and in response, staff are proposing to submit revised primacy applications for several rules: for the Administrative Penalty Authority, the Groundwater Rule, the Long-Term 2 Enhanced Surface Water Treatment Rule, the recently adopted Revised Total Coliform Rule, the Public Notification Rule, and the Consumer Confidence Reports Rule. Of these, only the last two will actually require revisions to the regulation text, so only those two will end up appearing in front of the board. We're tentatively looking at end of the year for notice of proposed rulemaking for the Public Notification Rule. The Consumer Confidence Reports Rule is kind of on hold while EPA sorts out what they're going to do relative to this rule, because they're required to make some changes to the federal rule too. The next slide, please. Many of the regulations and policy handbooks included in this year's priorities are heavily dependent on water quality data. Water quality data are necessary for compliance assessment, health exposure estimates, and economic and technological feasibility evaluations. We would like all of those analyses to be conducted with data in which we have a high degree of confidence, data of known and documented quality. The electronic format currently specified in regulations for submittal of drinking water analytical results is no longer adequate for drinking water program needs. In addition to current data system not being compliant with US EPA's cross-media electronic reporting regulation with respect to electronic signatures to ensure the integrity and enforceability of data submitted, California has additional drinking water standards and data quality goals beyond minimum federal requirements. The Division of Drinking Water's Quality Assurance section has been working to develop a data intake system or format that would allow us to receive the data California needs ahead of transmitting the federally required data to EPA's data portal. The current electronic reporting regulations need to be updated to specify the selected system or format. We expect to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking for this later this spring, with a board adoption hearing toward the end of the year. Next slide, please.
Sorry, question on that.
Okay.
I know staff have been meeting with and convening a stakeholder group on this, on our electronic annual report. And can you, I guess, just give some sense of how that is, those meetings are going and fitting into the process?
So just to distinguish, this is different than the electronic annual report component.
Okay.
This is for our data directly about what's monitored at the water systems that they submit as part of their regulatory process.
This is SWRCB then, right? That it mainly references then, Darren?
Correct. This is the data that goes to SWRCB. There's an interim system that catches it called WQIR now, which we're in the process of replacing with CLIP, a new revised version that will catch the data and then process it and get it into SWRCB and into the federal SWRCB side as well. So, but I am happy to comment on how the EAR components are going. In fact, we did just release the EAR report or EAR portal yesterday, open for business so that water systems can begin entering it. This is the first redo of it, so it's now in its new tool, which was a big, huge effort from our Division of Information Technology and our staff to work really hard to pull that together, as well as some ORPP staff as well. So a big congratulations to them to get that in its new platform. This is the beginning of many changes there. For instance, one of the many comments we've gotten is it's a big amount of data to enter in a short window, and we fully appreciate that. And that the data has the range from financial information to water system facility information to water use information. And many of the medium or larger water systems, those are 3 different people. That's not one person that enters that data. And so we'll be working with the work group that we've established to try to figure out how to break some of that apart and what some more appropriate ways of entering that would be, as well as moving some of the data to just be continuous enter. There's no reason when they have management changes or other contact information changes at a water system that they shouldn't update that at a very short time after it happens, rather than waiting for our annual report to tell us that it happened 6 months ago. So much more improvement to come there. We're super excited that we have the new tool now to begin allowing us to make those types of modifications and continuously improve that process.
Great. So many technology changes, which I know are really a big lift and also a big frustration on all sides. So,
and this item here, number 9, the Chrome Air rule and others, it seems a little mundane, but this is what keeps the wheels on the bus going around. These types of pipe laying exercises, shall we say, to just keep it going and keep us in compliance. So, not a very exciting one per se for those that aren't in the data know, but a very important one nonetheless.
Yeah, and exciting, because what this is systems better talking to systems ultimately, and allowing for then our state systems to just kind of marry up into what are federal requirements that may be different, but that don't necessarily require a person to interpret at every moment, but instead the systems can better talk to one another. So it is really great work.
Yes.
Okay. 10th on the list, 2018 legislation also added a directive for regulation development to the water code. By December 1st of next year, the State Water Board is required to adopt regulations for risk-based water quality standards for on-site treatment and reuse of non-potable water for non-potable end uses in multifamily, residential, commercial, and mixed-use buildings. The regulations would not address untreated gray water systems used exclusively for subsurface irrigation and would not address untreated rainwater systems. They would include at a minimum, or they must include at a minimum, risk-based log reduction targets for the removal of pathogens, water quality monitoring and reporting requirements, notification and public information requirements, and cross-connection controls. In addition to developing regulations of our own, we're also, similar to the daycare-led regulations, required to act as a consultant, but this time to the Department of Housing and Community Development, as they prepare any necessary corresponding building standards to support the risk-based water quality standards for them for December 1st, 2023. The stakeholder outreach is planned for this summer with a notice of proposed rulemaking projected for the end of the year. And I wanted to emphasize this is for use by local agencies. It would not be state enforced. Next slide, please. Also new for this year, recycled regulations are just a comprehensive update of the regular recycled water regulations that have been around for a few decades in Title 22. For background, the regulations were last updated in 2000, so it's been a while. There was an addition to the California Water Code recently to require updating the regulations comprehensively by January 1st of 2023, and it must incorporate provisions from the Cross-Connection Control Policy Handbook, which should be done later this year, and it includes a very specific requirement to include provisions for the use of swivel or changeover device for dual pump systems. We're projecting a notice of proposed rulemaking in early next year and a board adoption hearing in fall of 2022. Next slide, please. 12th on the list, and this is what you should have a change sheet for the resolution, are adding a harmful algal bloom notification and response levels. This isn't a formal rulemaking yet, but last month the Division of Drinking Water requested that OEHA prepare notification level recommendations for microsystem and cylindrospermopsin and an evaluation of anatoxin A and saxitoxin data leading to notification level recommendations if appropriate for those last two. Microsystem is a hepatotoxin released by some species of blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. It can cause skin conditions such as rashes, hives, or blisters, gastrointestinal symptoms, allergy or asthma-like conditions, and liver damage. Pets and other animals that drink the water can also be sickened by it. In 2015, US EPA issued 10-day health advisories of 0.3 micrograms per liter for children under age 6 and 1.6 micrograms per liter for adults and older children. Cylindrospermopsin is another toxin produced by cyanobacteria and for which EPA has also issued 10-day health advisories. For this one, it's 0.7 micrograms per liter for the younger children and 3.0 micrograms per liter for older children and adults, based on adverse effects to the liver and the kidney. Anatoxin A is another cyanotoxin associated with deaths in domestic animals, livestock, and waterfowl due to neurotoxicity, especially respiratory paralysis. EPA prepared a health effects support document in 2015 in which it found insufficient studies and occurrence data at that time to adequately support development of a health advisory, which is why we're asking OEHA to review data and see if there's sufficient information now. Saxitoxin is also a neurotoxin produced by some cyanobacteria. It's more commonly associated with paralytic shellfish poisoning. But again, that was insufficient data for an evaluation, I think, from EPA then. One or more of these recommendations from OEHA may be available by early summer, hopefully in time for the harmful algal bloom season. OEHA does have a retired annuitant available with expertise on this, which is why we may be able to get recommendations for these ahead of, for example, some of the PFAS contaminants. As with the recently established PFBS notification and response levels, the new public notice process will be followed. Next slide, please. And last on the list, also a new addition to the priorities, new maximum contaminant levels are new and revised. Since 1997, the Health and Safety Code, so after what Darren mentioned, the 1996 chemical contaminant rules from EPA, the Health and Safety Code section has 116365 has required that maximum contaminant levels be set at concentrations as close to the public health goal as is economically and technologically feasible, placing primary emphasis on protection of public health, and then to come back and review existing MCLs at least once every 5 years. When reviewing existing MCLs, we're trying to see if there are any technological or economic feasibility barriers to providing materially greater protection of public health or closer attainment of the public health goal as required by statute. Next slide, please. In the first category for new, we're proposing to work on development of a maximum contaminant level for N-nitroso-dimethylamine, or NDMA. NDMA is part of a larger class of disinfection byproducts known as nitrosamines. It's formed in chloramine disinfection of drinking water and chlorine disinfection of domestic wastewater. It's unintentionally formed in certain industrial processes and was formerly used in production of liquid rocket fuel. Nobody's deliberately making NDMA. US EPA has not developed a drinking water standard for NDMA. We do have California had an initial 1988 notification level that was revised to its current 0.01 micrograms per liter concentration in 2002. It has a corresponding response level of 0.3 micrograms per liter. And in 2006, OEHA established a public health goal of 0.003 micrograms per liter based on carcinogenicity. Next, thank you. In the second category of revised MCLs, staff were considering revisions to existing maximum contaminant levels for styrene and for cadmium. Styrene is an organic chemical. It's a precursor to polystyrene and is widely used to make rubber and plastics. It currently has a maximum contaminant level of 100 micrograms per liter and a detection limit set, DLR set equal to the public health goal of 0.5 micrograms per liter. OEHA updated the public health goal in 2010 to reflect its carcinogenicity and currently established a health protective value of 4 micrograms per liter based on adverse impacts during gestation and genotoxicity. Source monitoring shows no occurrence of styrene above 2 micrograms per liter in the last 4 years, with 5 micrograms per liter as the highest reported detection since 2010. So it looks like there's good opportunity for both technological and economic feasibility for a considerable movement on styrene. Cadmium is a naturally occurring element found in soil and mineral deposits, metal plating discharges, runoff from waste batteries, plastic pigments, and galvanized pipe corrosion. Cadmium currently has an MCL of 5 micrograms per liter and a detection limit for purposes of reporting of 1 microgram per liter. OEHA updated its 1999 cadmium public health goal in 2006 to 0.04 micrograms per liter based on kidney toxicity. Source monitoring shows 30 sources with greater than 1 microgram per liter over the last 10 years, with occurrence limited to a single county. Next slide, please. These are a little bit lower priority than some of the other priorities. So in between other priorities, especially the hexavalent chromium MCL, staff are proposing to work on developing new or revised MCLs for NDMA, styrene, and cadmium. Depending on how the other rules go, notices of proposed rulemaking for these MCLs are expected to be issued this coming winter. Next slide, please.
Are you, on the previous slide, are you thinking that you will move forward with each of these MCLs simultaneously as a package kind of approach, or one at a time?
They're not closely related, so I think they would be separate packages. I think styrene and cadmium could go probably around the same time because they're farther along because they initially started as a research or training exercise. NDMA will take a little bit more because it's a new MCL, and I understand there's quite a bit of data cleanup to do for it before we can really get into it. So it's possible that styrene and cadmium might go first, and then maybe a few months later we'd see NDMA.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. In addition to the proposed regulatory priorities for this year, we wanted to provide a sort of regulatory priorities preview of additional topics and contaminants that we're keeping an eye on and setting up for eventual rulemaking. They're things that could appear on a future priorities list. Early last year, OEHA issued revised public health goals for each of the 4 contaminants comprising total trihalomethanes: chloroform, dibromochloromethane, dichlorobromomethane, and bromoform. The revised public health goals will be considered in the next MCL review, and we're looking to pick these up next year. In 2019, the division of, or sorry, I should regroup that. We've also got draft public health goals for haloacetic acids for 5 of them, so they're known as HAA5. We're looking to consider a suite of disinfection byproducts, MCLs, to start working on that next year. So that one would come at the same time. We would consider those concurrently because they're somewhat related. And then in 2019, the Division of Drinking Water formally requested that OEHA develop a public health goal for 1,4-dioxane so that MCL development could proceed. OEHA is actively working on that, and we're looking forward to a draft public health goal over the next few months, I think, maybe middle of this year. We're reviewing available information on nitrosamine. We moved cyanotoxins up on the list, so we will look forward to that in the future. We're looking at nitrosamines as well. They're not on this list because we've got an MCL proposed, but we're also looking at analytical methods and for additional nitrosamines. We're keeping an eye on Legionella and other issues associated with premise plumbing. We're looking at distribution system regulations and overhauling the approach to secondary standards and where monitoring is conducted. We'll be continuing to coordinate with LTAC to determine whether existing MCLs can be lowered to values closer to the public health goal. And there'll be continuing work on PFOA, PFOS, and other perfluorinated compounds. Next slide, please. So this is the total list of proposed priority regulation work for this year. As a reminder, it's not a ranking of the most important regulations. It's not a list of an order of expected completion. It's the list of the rules that we're proposing to devote the bulk of our rulemaking resources to this year. Many of these regulations are being developed concurrently by staff across our program management branch. Next slide, please. And this is a rough timeline of when we think right now things are going to happen. We've got a notice of proposed rulemaking timeline, and you can see for the lead and copper rule, we're working on it, but it's not going to be something that shows up in front of the board for consideration over the next 12 months, really. Same for primacy. Some of those won't show up in front of the board, but there is actually work going on in the background. In PFAS, you can see that we're sort of, we're doing things in the background, but it's unlikely that there'll be something that shows up kind of in the formal rulemaking realm until early next year.
This is very helpful. I really appreciate the division putting this together. Hope it helps the public understand the division's work and prioritization here, and moments when to engage, when to expect a public workshop, and when to be prepared for a discussion before the board here for adoption on an item. Thank you.
That's it. The next slide is just any questions from the board.
Just really incredible thanks to the Division of Drinking Water, and thank you, Ms. Hall, for the presentation here. It's quite the breadth of work that is going on in the division, and to my mind, from microplastics, which directed by the legislature, and then so needing to meet deadlines, but nonetheless incredibly cutting edge in just its discussion, what it means, and even synthesizing it can help drive what are ultimately policy discussions and questions as to what to do about potential problems, and even just better assessing what the challenge is. And there, similarly, PFAS, other emerging contaminants of concern. But I want to acknowledge that in this work, I see quite a bit of climate change work as well, and glad that we're going to be shifting into a climate change discussion. Particularly, and I'm glad for the change sheet and the inclusion of the harmful algal blooms, toxins, because there is the reality of a continually warming world, and needing to better have protective measures against these harmful algal blooms that we see, not just here in California, but we know that our brothers and sisters and colleagues in the other states are also grappling with here. I think of particularly, certainly the Great Lakes region, Iowa and other places where, these harmful algal blooms are shutting down drinking water facilities. And we're seeing the same as well in the Delta, and, I think it's Dos Rios and other places that have had challenges. So just, thank you for the work. Thank you for continuing to be responsive, and incredibly proud of this work and the prioritization. I have no questions or edit here. It is a good synthesis, and just really appreciate the incredible work that the division is undertaking on numerous fronts here, and its incorporation with our other divisions, the Division of Water Quality, financial assistance. Certainly, I can think of, I reflect back on the last 5 to 6 years of the Division of Drinking Water at the board, and just incredibly proud of this work. So just Thank you. Fellow board colleagues?
Yeah, I'll echo that. You know, I think so helpful to, maybe you could even go back to the last slide, because I love, or not the last slide, the second to last slide that had the timeline. I think the more that we can give the public and utilities or water providers, you know, some planning in terms of timing and what to expect on the types of regulatory processes, the more we can do that, the better. And just, I think this whole annual process of having this kind of information item is fabulous. And, you know, I think shows this huge amount of work that we're doing this year and we continue to do every year. I think over the, you know, in 2020, we were, as you showed, we were able to get a lot of things over the finish line and address some of this backlog, I would say, of regulatory work that we've had, you know, dating back to even before we took over the program. I also agree, it's really interesting to see the integration of these priorities with Division of Water Quality. So obviously we have the PFAS orders, but also I think on HABs, you know, there's, I think, increasing priority around our biostimulatory and nutrient regulatory programs that interact with that as well. So I think just seeing that kind of commonality in terms of the priorities that the board's doing in connection across our divisions is really great. I think my two questions are one is, you know, we do this annual kind of strategic work plan in terms of laying out our priorities for the coming year towards the end of the year. And so I know we do that, you know, through a public process to try and help people get a sense of things. When we, you know, when we look at the, you know, we have 13 things this year that we're working on. There's a whole list of work we're thinking about in the coming year. Each of those takes a lot. And so I know we've discussed this a bit internally, but I think the more that staff can help us understand or get some lens to public health risk and also disproportionate exposure of especially some of these, the list of future contaminants and regulatory actions that we're looking at. I guess like you could go back, maybe is it a slide? No, it's the one before that, the future year regulations. Sorry, so it's 2 slides before this. Yes, so, you know, I think that, you know, we have, each of those is a lot in terms of disinfectant byproducts, 1,4-dioxane, PFAS, PFOA, and distribution system and secondary standards. I think each of those are a lot. And as we help to inform, you know, how our priorities evolve around the division's regulatory work, just having some way of informing us within that consideration around public health risk and again, potential disproportionate exposure would be really helpful for our annual priority setting process towards the end of the year. And then also obviously for this time next year as the division brings these things forward. And I'll just say, I am particularly interested in the distribution system and secondary standards and kind of premise plumbing issues that I think are of real concern, especially in urban areas. And I think often, and low-income areas that are disproportionately impacted by many things. And so being able to better monitor and understand and ensure there's action around distribution system contaminants, I think is personally a priority. I'd love to see us be able to move on in the future. And I think is somewhat of a complement to what we're doing, the huge workload on lead and copper. So those are my comments. I'm looking forward to any public comments, but just again, echo the chair's thanks and reflections. Really amazing workload here. And I think great momentum that this past year has shown, and appreciate all the process and work and transparency and public engagement here.
I can quickly respond, Board Member Firestone, that we definitely are transitioning from a lot of the regulations we inherited from prior actions and have now moved most of those out of the way, CRUM 6 kind of being one of the last ones in that regard. And so you're correct, we do need to continue to do a better analysis of how to focus on health impacts. And so we are working to develop information along that line that we can then factor into a lot of our determinations as to how health protective are they and where they're at. And that would include the evaluation of existing MCLs in that. As you all have heard me talk many times, arsenic is still, even though it has an MCL, remains one of the largest health threats in California at the MCL level that it's set at, or even nearly under it. It still has a high incident of health impact at that level. And so, and there are others to be considered as well. So definitely hear you. We're working in that direction to try to make sure that we can bring that to the board and use that as an informative process going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Board Member. Much appreciated on that point. It is important to just communicate our health understandings and help that also prioritize what is a number of different constituents out there that are certainly of concern. And even communicating, how protective current standards are and what is of most concern is important. To my mind, the consumer confidence reports and even some of the requirements or how water agencies communicate to their constituents what is in their water is really critical there. And that being a touch point to say, okay, well, specific to your system, what should you be most worried about? What is most health impactful? And what are the help folks are, including ourselves, better prioritize and understand, how this all is being most protective, and we're driving toward really just, again, protecting public health at its best. And we can't if we don't understand what are the relative risks amongst the maximum contaminant limits that we're looking to develop or drive. So thank you, Board Member Firestone. Great point.
If I could just add a bit to that from my perspective, and that is that I agree with the comments that we should be prioritizing based on human health exposure, that's absolutely the right approach to take here. At the same time, I'm looking at this list today of all the different regulations that we're thinking about, kind of the chemical soup that's out there, all of our different standard setting processes from public health goals to response levels, notification levels, maximum contaminant levels. It's a really complicated scheme that we deal with here in ensuring safe drinking water for Californians. And I think it's really important to emphasize that not for everyone, but for the majority of Californians that turn on their tap water, that it is safe to drink. And communication about that and about our process setting, about how we prioritize these different contaminants that are out there, is just really important. I think we have a robust public process and we need to continue that. And also just think about the messaging, about the safety of California's water supply generally. Admittedly, there's many challenges out there. I will acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of water systems that still struggle meeting even the standards that we have today. But I want folks to feel, comfort for those that, do meet standards and see that in their consumer confidence reports that, there could be a lot out there, but, by and large, it is safe to drink the water in California. So I know it's a challenging topic, but I feel like just looking at this list, I feel concerned looking at this and just wondering what's in my water supply. And I imagine a lot of folks are who might see this presentation or see our list of pending regulatory standards might feel the same way. So just thinking through that as we go forward here, I think will be very important to do. And then I just wanted to add one more thing about climate change. I appreciated the comments on the harmful algal blooms and looking forward to the discussion on the next item. And also, some of the other regulatory efforts here for direct potable reuse regulations, for the on-site reuse regulations, that all is going to help us adapt better to climate change as we move forward, even enhance groundwater treatment capabilities. So I think when we're looking at that toolbox of what we need to adapt and prepare for the future, I think clearly Division of Drinking Water is taking a leadership role in much of what we need. So thank you for all that. That's all.
Great points. Thank you, board member. Vice Chair, Board Member Dodek, any additional questions or comments?
As usual, I'm learning not just from staff, but from my fellow board members. So I just appreciate the questions that have been asked and the comprehensive report. And Board Member McGuire, I appreciate what you've just said. That's been an issue of ongoing concern. How do we, at one level, really push as much as we possibly can with the SAFER program and really being focused on improving conditions for those Californians that don't have access to safe and affordable water, but then at the same time, assure the public that most of these systems do meet the standards and they don't need to buy bottled water. They don't need to be, they should be informed members of the public and read their consumer confidence reports. But how do we message that at the same time? So thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Well, thank you. Appreciate everyone's discussion here on the item. Again, there is a lot and a lot of chemical constituent names here that can sound frightening. And again, I think it's our intent here to continue to do better at communicating the relative risks and the safety as well. And I do appreciate the comments from all the board members. So thank you. All right, well, with that, we could potentially take a 10-minute break if we'd like, or just go into the next informational item. I'll note it's our last one before board member reports, so I can go either way. Mr. Lawfer, I see you've popped on camera. Do you have a thought?
Well, one quick observation. I think a motion would be in order for the resolution and the change sheet at this point.
That's true. Yes, it is. It is. Thank you, Mr. Lawfer. And so do I have that motion on the item here then?
Sure, I'll move to adopt the resolution with the change sheet.
I'll second.
Thank you. Ms. Townsend, can you please call the roll call vote?
Certainly. Board Member Firestone.
Aye.
Board Member McGuire.
Aye.
Board Member Dodek.
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo.
Aye.
And Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. And the priorities are adopted and the motion is carried. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Let's go ahead and transition into our next informational item, unless fellow board colleagues, you'd like a 10-minute break here, but folks should feel free to break as needed as well.
I could use a 5-minute break, but
Okay.
I'm also happy to jump out. I just, if we can.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take 5 minutes then. And thanks, board member, for chiming in. Then we'll go ahead and reconvene here at 10:40 and see everyone here in a moment. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you again, board member, for the break. And now we can move on to item number 5, which is our annual update on our climate change work and resolution. How's it going, Mr. Gomberg? Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel and board members. Happy to be with you this morning and happy to follow that fantastic presentation by our drinking water staff. And as board member McGuire and yourself noted, many connections there between our regulatory work and climate change, which is what we're going to talk about in this presentation. So today, I am joined by Karen Mogus, our Deputy Director for Water Quality, as well as Chris Yoon, our lead staff member for climate change in my office. And we're going to talk about the progress we've made since our last update to the board, which was actually 2 years ago now, and some of the major initiatives we're working on across the agency, drinking water, water quality, and beyond. So with that, we'll jump right in. Next slide, please. So as you'll recall, the board passed its climate change resolution, which is a directive to state board staff back in 2017. It actually has 30 different directives within that resolution that correspond to various aspects of climate change response, both mitigation, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, and we have a few ongoing initiatives there. And then also adaptation, or now as we generally refer to it, resilience, which is really looking at ways to protect and reduce harm and risk to both infrastructure and communities from the impacts of climate change. The resolution also covers topics such as data and tracking, as well as engagement and outreach to tribes, to stakeholders, and to the general public. Within the resolution are a number of near-term actions, and some of those we had deadlines, and some of that work has been completed, and we covered some of that 2 years ago, and we'll cover a little bit more of it today. There are also a number of ongoing actions where our work, whether it's developing regulatory standards or regulations, ongoing interagency collaboration, thematically around topics such as sea level rise or forest carbon sequestration, that is ongoing work. And we'll cover some of that as well. And that leads me to the coordination note at the bottom of this slide. A lot of this work, because climate change impacts all aspects of our society and all sectors, is by its nature intersectoral. The Water Board is not here going it alone. We have to work with our state agency partners, whether it's coastal management agencies, land management agencies, energy management agencies, and beyond to do this work. And we'll touch on a number of those coordinated initiatives as well. Next slide. So one of the things we wanted to do in this presentation is really tie together some of sort of the key themes that underlie the board's work. Both the priorities, which were sort of discussed as part of the last item. Just in the context of drinking water, we have so many ongoing drinking water quality standards going on along with other work. And of course, the board, as board member Firestone noted, updates its priorities on an annual basis. But really, we want to make sure that the climate change initiatives we have are integrated into and sort of integral to generally what the board's overall priorities are, as well as with the board's ongoing commitment to racial justice and equity, and making sure that, again, our climate work is equity focused. Going forward, next slide. So some examples of these connections here within drinking water. Of course, we have the SAFER program, which is very squarely focused on resilience for marginalized communities, particularly communities of color, as well as our work on drought resilience for small water systems, often the same communities that are part of SAFER. And of course, that's collaborative work with the Department of Water Resources and the Office of Emergency Services and others. And we'll have a report out soon. And of course, there's already legislation this year. On wastewater and co-digestion, this is an area where we do have a role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, in this case, methane emissions. And we'll talk more about this later on, but again, a sort of interagency work, and also where there's definitely an equity lens, because many of our wastewater treatment plants are, again, in marginalized, disadvantaged communities where investments bring opportunities for jobs and economic development, but there's also air quality impacts and other impacts that we need to mitigate. When it comes to sea level rise, again, it's an issue where we can be targeted in our response with a lens towards equity, particularly when it comes to vulnerable communities along the coast. And we're engaged with the State Ocean Protection Council and the Coastal Commission and others on that work. And again, we have a nexus there to our wastewater treatment regulatory work and other permitting work that both the State Board and the regions do when it comes to coastal infrastructure and community impacts. And then the last bullet there at the bottom as an example, and this was talked about in the last item, harmful algal blooms, which are increasing in frequency and severity due to climate change. And again, we're working on to better understand and monitor those and try to respond in a way that is equitable. Next slide. So I'm now going to turn it over to Karen Mogis to talk about our work in the water quality space.
Thanks, Max. Good morning, board members. I'm Karen Mogis, Deputy Director, Division of Water Quality, and I'm going to start my part of the presentation today with our work to collect consistent information on recycled water production and use. I'm happy to say that Division of Water Quality staff completed item C3 of the State Board's climate change resolution. The recycled water policy and the governor's water resilience portfolio set a statewide goal to increase the use of recycled water to 2.5 million acre feet per year by 2030. To evaluate the feasibility of this goal and to track progress towards meeting it, the State Water Board has implemented volume reporting for all wastewater and recycled water producers statewide. Permittees are required to annually report volumetric data on wastewater and, if applicable, recycled water. Annual reports for data from the previous calendar year are due as electronic submissions to GeoTracker by April 30th of each year. So we're coming up on the due date for the 2020 reports next month. The first annual report for calendar year 2019 showed California used 686,000 acre feet of recycled water in 2019. 3.7 million acre feet of influent entered wastewater treatment plants and 2.7 million acre feet was discharged. Consistent and complete annually reported data will allow the water boards to meet implementation needs of the recycled water policy as well as the governor's water resilience portfolio, as I mentioned. It'll allow us to fill data gaps for additional statewide water planning efforts to respond to the impacts of climate change and to assist the state as well as local communities in evaluating the feasibility of increasing recycled water production and use. Now moving on to stormwater. In addition to recycled water, stormwater is an important resource for many agencies to develop sustainable water supplies. And the board has identified stormwater as a priority area for us to focus on. Board resolution number D4 recognizes stormwater capture and use as an important climate change adaptation strategy and calls for prioritizing stormwater detention and infiltration. And oh, thank you for changing the slide. I forgot to say so. calls for prioritizing stormwater detention and infiltration and estimating the amount of stormwater captured and used across the state. Division of Water Quality's storms staff are working with the Department of Water Resources to develop standards for dry well construction, including a regulatory framework to ensure groundwater is adequately protected from pollution in stormwater runoff when infiltrated via dry wells. We're also working with a consortium of wastewater and stormwater agencies to foster collaboration and understand both the benefits and the barriers to forming such partnerships for building integrated water supply and water quality solutions through regional approaches. Also, in collaboration with the Department of Water Resources, we've developed goals for stormwater capture and use. But to measure progress towards those goals, we need to be able to quantify the potential volume of stormwater capture and use. And it's not as easy as just asking agencies to measure their influent and effluent and recycled water like it is for recycled water. So while stormwater capture for specific regions in Southern California has been estimated, we do not have an estimate of the volume of stormwater captured and used statewide. And that's because various public agencies and entities and associations of agencies around California quantify stormwater runoff capture differently, but the estimates are based on different underlying assumptions. So for example, direct measurement versus models. They also use information from different components of water resources infrastructure, for example, dams versus reservoirs, and presents information in a different context. So is it for public information versus evaluating the feasibility of stormwater capture and use? So as a result, collating a statewide estimate from multiple sources and methods currently isn't feasible. So Storms is working on a project to evaluate the different methods of calculating stormwater capture and use to ultimately initiate a pilot program to estimate the amount of stormwater captured statewide. This also includes collaboration with US EPA on implementing the National Water Reuse Action Plan that builds on existing efforts to quantify the volumes of water used and reused from key sources such as municipal wastewater, stormwater, agricultural drainage, industry processing and cooling water, and oil and gas produced water.
Do you think there will be an update at some point this year about that pilot project and about the efforts to, come up with some methods to get our arms wrapped around that, what that potential looks like? I'm very interested in this issue and, thinking about the opportunities here. Just would like to get a better sense for when we might expect some feedback.
I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but certainly willing to come back with an update on where we are in that project. And happy to either present it as an information item or as part of our executive director's report, and maybe both. So okay, we will definitely follow up.
Yeah, both would be great. I think it'd be great to have an informational item, maybe just focused on a storms update. I think it's maybe been a bit since we've had a storms unit update. So
okay,
thank you.
That sounds
would be wonderful.
Great.
Thank you.
Will do. So moving on, stormwater permitting, of course, is another avenue that we use to encourage climate adaptation through our permits. Stormwater permits regulate the quality of water running off of a site, a facility, or through a municipal separate stormwater sewer system, or an MS4. And permits are an opportunity for us to address climate change and water resiliency. The stormwater permitting program staff work with storms planning staff to study, develop, and support stormwater capture and reuse projects and principles to address climate change and drought and protect California's freshwater resources and beneficial uses. The industrial and municipal stormwater permits incentivize infiltration of stormwater as a means of removing pollutants and recharging groundwater, as well as using low impact development practices and water-friendly landscaping. Industrial facilities are encouraged to infiltrate their stormwater in cooperation with their local municipality, increasing the volume of water available for infiltration and recharge, as well as keeping pollutants out of waterways and reducing the need for treatment downstream. All right, so moving on to sea level rise actions, and thank you for changing the slide again. I can't apparently do it all at once. Water supplies and infrastructure are also threatened by sea level rise resulting from climate change. California's coast faces a significant risk of sea level rise of up to a foot by 2030 and 7.6 feet by 2100, threatening critical infrastructure such as wastewater treatment plants as well as water quality. In early 2020, the California Natural Resources Agency, the California Coastal Commission, and Cali PA secretaries endorsed the sea level rise principles for use in planning, policy setting, project development, and decision making. As part of that, the Ocean Protection Council has convened a sea level rise statewide leadership team executive committee and working group. And both of those are made up of multiple agencies involved with climate change actions on the coast. The working group is tasked with developing a work plan with near-term and long-term actions that agencies can take to prepare and address sea level rise in alignment with the sea level rise principles. And that group will regularly report to the Sea Level Rise statewide leadership team executive committee on outcomes of actions identified in the work plan and to make recommendations for priority work areas. John Bishop serves on the executive committee, and my staff, Kat Walsh, serves on the working group, and we can certainly keep the board updated on the activities of those groups. They've just initiated their meetings, and so more to come on that. And finally, I'll just touch on forestry and fire protection. Climate change also increases the vulnerability of forests to catastrophic fire due to more frequent and prolonged drought and higher temperatures. But at the same time, improving forest health is a critical climate change adaptation strategy. So the water boards have been a member of the Governor's Forest Management Task Force since its first convening under the Brown administration in 2018. The task force made recommendations that were ultimately incorporated into the Governor's Forest Resilience Action Plan, which outlines a comprehensive and ambitious list of goals and objectives to address everything from increasing the pace and scale of vegetation management to statewide strategy development, streamlining regulatory processes, multi-agency technology platforms, utility corridor management, and restoration activities post-fire. To support these actions while ensuring water quality is protected, the water boards have been working to streamline permitting activities and are actively working on statewide orders for vegetation treatment activities in forested areas, which just went out for public comment last week, and along utility corridors. And we're working with the utility companies to draft a statewide order for those activities that will be before the board sometime in 2022. So that's my update from DWQ. I'll hand the presentation back over to Max.
Thank you, Karen. So now we're going to turn to drinking water. We heard a lot about our drinking water quality regulatory development earlier this morning, and now we're going to talk about some of the other really important work going on within the drinking water space. So as you know, our drinking water staff and our emergency management staff coordinate again with a number of different state agencies when we have climate-related disasters, most recently where we've had fires that have impacted drinking water systems from Paradise onward over the past couple of years. And so that work is ongoing and certainly critical as we experience these climate disasters with increasing frequency. In addition, we are actively working on completing a report to the legislature in coordination with the Department of Water Resources to look at ways that collectively we can be more supportive to small systems when it comes to droughts and water supply availability and shortage. There are a number of recommendations in there that we would implement relating to small system emergency and drought preparedness and support for that. And then we also have ongoing training that our staff does in coordination with US EPA on climate resilience planning using tools that have been developed by EPA. Next slide. And of course, there's the SAFER program, which, as you know, is funded by our statewide climate investment program, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And of course, the goal of SAFER is first and foremost to provide communities with safe drinking water. But there are also co-benefits related to climate change. And you can see some of them listed there. We've already touched on the drought vulnerability piece. And then also there is the potential as we invest in infrastructure and operations and maintenance for small systems to see co-benefits on energy management, use of renewables to power systems as well. So that's something that is definitely part of the program in terms of capturing all the benefits with the money that is available to the board to run the program. Next slide. And as part of receiving the money, the water board is required to submit annual reports to the air board, which administers the fund for the state. And you can see there are a number of reporting areas where we can identify, again, how the money being used for SAFER is generating all kinds of different benefits for communities and then statewide as well, when it comes to workforce development, when it comes to public health and resilience benefits as well. And of course, part of the goal with all this reporting and all of the work that we do is accountability and transparency for spending this money. Next slide. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who's going to talk about our co-digestion and wastewater initiative.
Great. Thanks, Max. Good morning. Again, I'm Chris Hyun, the new staff specialist for climate at the State Water Board. I'll go over wastewater, co-digestion, and related interagency coordination. As you know, food waste co-digestion at wastewater treatment plants is considered a win-win in terms of greenhouse gas reduction and critical infrastructure resilience. As a quick overview, food waste in landfills emits methane, a powerful greenhouse gas, which is now targeted by Senate Bill 1383, which calls for a 40% methane reduction by 2030. Diverting food waste for processing at wastewater treatment plants reduces methane emissions from landfills. Co-digestion is the process of breaking down food waste and sewer sludge together at wastewater treatment plants through anaerobic digestion. And anaerobic digestion produces biogas, which can be used to generate renewable electricity. Digestion also produces biosolids, which can be used and applied on land to support healthy soils and carbon sequestration. A number of wastewater treatment plants in California already have anaerobic digestion, with extra capacity to process food waste, but they need capacity in the other components of the co-digestion system, as pictured in the slide, including a food waste receiving station, biogas system, and biosolids dewatering system. As you know, in August 2020, the board released a report called Co-Digestion Capacity in California. It was based on a survey of about 225 facilities, and the report found that building up existing wastewater treatment plants for co-digestion statewide could result in a net benefit up to $255 million per year due to reduced energy costs, tipping fees, energy credits, and biogas sales. It can also reduce greenhouse gas emissions up to 2.4 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent a year. And people can find the report on the board's climate change webpage. Next slide. All of this also relates to the interagency climate resilience initiatives the board is coordinating. Since the release of our co-digestion report, we've been moving forward with a rollout. There was a webinar and presentations on the report. We met with industry stakeholders in December 2020 and are currently coordinating with other agencies like Cal Recycle for an environmental justice leaders meeting on co-digestion in order to collect comments and make recommendations for advancing co-digestion across California. We're also concerned about the climate change resilience of wastewater treatment plants, especially related to sea level rise. This highlights a need for clearer permitting standards. So to inform this and to understand the state's adaptation needs, we are preparing to collect data on wastewater treatment plant resilience. We had prepared a questionnaire in early 2020, which was postponed due to the pandemic. So now we hope to roll out a questionnaire for data collection later this year. Relatedly, we are also currently meeting with other agencies to move biosolids forward for healthy soils. For example, the Division of Water Quality has been meeting with CalRecycle to develop a tool to navigate regulations for the application of biosolids. And we are considering something similar maybe for co-digestion. And that's it for me. So I'll hand it back to Max for the remainder of the update.
Thank you, Chris. So as you know, we also have some other relevant regulatory work underway in the urban space that relates to climate resilience for our metropolitan areas, our urban areas across the state, and they're listed there. We're really focused on getting our conservation and efficiency work through the regulatory processes, and especially as we see yet another dry year shaping up. And of course, the reductions in water use and efficiency have, again, multiple co-benefits in the climate space, resilience to drought, energy benefits, as well as when we talk about increasing use, for example, of native plant species, reducing urban heat island effects. We also have reinstated our mandatory monthly reporting by the state's large urban water agencies, so we can track urban water use, and we'll begin reporting back to the board on a monthly basis about urban water use trends coming soon. Next slide. When it comes to water rights, you heard from water rights staff about a month ago on the report, the draft report on an effective climate change response within the water rights permitting space. That report is out now for public comment, and the link on this slide will take you to the public comment page if anyone is listening to this presentation and would like to comment on that report. I'll also note within sort of the overall flows and rights space, the Air Board, as part of its ongoing research program, has funded UC Merced to develop a model for natural and working lands and carbon impacts or carbon sequestration, and they're including a number of water elements in that model related to stream flows and water levels. And so we are in coordination with them regarding that model and its potential uses to inform our water rights actions. Next slide. So in developing this and talking to a number of you, we touched on the topic around performance measures and what can we track out of this resolution, and how can we understand overall our progress on the board's climate initiatives. And so I want to make a couple of points here. You can see on the slide, and you've heard about this already, there are areas where we are actively quantifying things, in particular on our recycled water development, on water use and conservation. We're moving in that direction on stormwater. There are some parts of the resolution and this ongoing work that are more difficult to quantify. How protective are we being of coastal communities and coastal infrastructure? I think we have a long way to go on a number of the sort of broader topics. And that sort of then corresponds to the top bullet here, which is what we can do in the near term versus what is our ongoing long-term strategy. And so I think this is something that we should all be discussing amongst staff and board members about where do performance metrics fit in? How do we understand our progress towards integrating climate responsiveness into all of our programmatic work across the divisions, and then of course in coordination with the regional boards as well. And definitely welcome board member thoughts on that topic. Next slide. So I believe the next slide is our closing slide. And basically just want to, again, re-emphasize the ongoing work to sort of integrate climate along with our other overarching goals as an agency. You've heard about some of our major initiatives today, and we're looking forward to make additional progress on sort of climate responsiveness within the board's existing priorities as we move through the year. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gomberg. It was a good overview, and know that there's just a lot going on, and that so much of the climate work is kind of integrated in a way at the boards that it's the lens for which all of our programs are having to adapt and continue to see their work. And I think, yes, always room to better understand how we quantify, that work both. And I think it's easier, as you've kind of noted, on some of the more external facing components, like, are we meeting water recycling targets? Where are we on conservation? Things that kind of have numbers better associated with them, and that we're getting better at tracking. And then there's others that are a little more ephemeral, but really critical nonetheless, which is like the interagency coordination, the number of projects that I know are just out there that are in this climate space. I think of the 30 by 30 goals and biodiversity as well, and certainly the cutting the green tape sort of initiatives, and so there is a lot going on, and a lot and fortunate for the work, and so just thank you. Just off my broad comment here, and this is for consideration and thought for my fellow board colleagues, is we'll be running up on 5 years since we first adopted the resolution, and knowing that there are a number of sort of shorter term items and longer term, and to the extent that we continue to want to see better metrics or kind of better form here, I would propose perhaps this is a listening year, and in 2022 when we hit that 5-year mark, we look at an update to that resolution in a way that perhaps makes sense to us, and just broad thought there. Don't know what feeling is from folks in the program about the need to update that, if it's stale, if we're finding that we're kind of ticking off some of the short-term items and need to repopulate a short-term list, and or perhaps even reframe some of the document, knowing that a lot has gone on in 5 years since the board last adopted. But just generally propose that to my colleagues for some thought, and certainly don't have to decide whether we're going to update now, but it could, again, especially if we use the next year to figure out what we would want to try to update, what makes sense, could kind of further structure and focus, particularly some of the metrics, discussion I think that my colleagues want to have. So, but thank you again. This is an incredible amount of work, and appreciate this overview. We do have one public commenter, but please do welcome comments and questions from my colleagues before we move to public comment.
I'm sure I'll just offer that I appreciate your comments, Chair Esquivel, and I certainly would support taking a look next year or whenever the appropriate time would be, at the resolution from 2017, knowing that that was itself an update to an initial resolution on climate change, and there were a lot of short-term staff tasks and projects in there. We continue a lot in so many areas. I think I really appreciated this update today. It really is impressive how much we're tackling right now, and so I think the focus on getting a number of those initiatives completed or farther along is well placed. But finding the right time to take a longer look, perhaps at what sort of long-term goals should we be setting as an organization, I think would be a worthwhile exercise to at least think through. The other thing I wanted to mention is that just through my interactions with a number of the regional water quality control boards, I found they've been doing quite a bit of thinking about climate change, adaptation and mitigation strategies specific to their regions. Bay Area Regional Board, Lahontan, San Diego, they all, probably many others, all have their own targeted climate adaptation strategies in kind of different formats and different looks, and rightly so, targeted to their regions. But I think it would be good to kind of take a step back and look at what the regions are doing, whether it's the forest health or sea level rise adaptation. Take a look at their different priorities and actions and figure out how we can better integrate what we're doing at the state board with some of their priorities. So maybe in that next year, in that look, some better coordination there might be useful. So I just wanted to throw that out there for discussion.
I appreciate that feedback, Board Member McGuire, and we do meet with the regions on a quarterly basis to understand where they're going. And of course, the state board's resolution is directed to our staff, which is why we didn't focus on the regions today. But I do think there is a lot of good work at the regional level that you point out, and more opportunity for integration and coordination between sort of what we're doing and what the regions are focused on.
Yeah, good points, Board Member. And Eileen, yes, please.
Yeah, I was just going to reinforce, agree with what Max said. We really value the regions, and there's some areas where they sort of have the lead and other areas where we do. And in addition to the quarterly meetings that ORPP has, we discuss this from time to time at our MCC meetings, the leadership meetings among all the state and regional water boards. We had an item a couple of months ago where where Region 2 took the lead and talked to us about their sea level rise efforts. So I think it makes sense to try to capture and report on some of those efforts, but I just wanted to assure the board members that we recognize this is something that we can't or don't want to do without the participation, the active participation and leadership of the regional boards, and we are trying to keep abreast of what they're doing and make sure that we are each informed about the other's efforts.
I appreciate that, and I'm glad to hear that coordination is going on. I sort of thought that it probably was, but didn't hear a whole lot about it today. And for me, it's just the ongoing challenges about resources and staffing constraints, and how can we best leverage all the talents and capabilities that we see throughout the water boards generally. So I think sounds like there's opportunity there, and we'll look forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah, I think it's both a matter of expanding that work, but also kind of having it elevate a little more so that it's at sort of all of our awareness. The various projects, to your point, Board Member, that are bubbling up in the regions, how they kind of connect to what are then maybe statewide tools once they've kind of been incubated in a certain region. I'll acknowledge, and I want to thank the leadership and many of you in helping bridge this leadership as well to the regions in the development of the water resiliency portfolio. There, I think, its emphasis on regional lenses on the challenges that are presented really were informed by the regional water quality control boards and their expertise and leadership. And we know, given how varied the state is hydrologically, and that each region, it is unto them to really figure out how best to lead in this climate change space on a local level. But it then begs, how do we expand those resources here at the state level? Whether it's sea level rise mapping that we it's provided as a basis for decision making at the regional boards as they try to better incorporate in permits, or maybe it's some remote sensing project that is better quantifying some need. I think there's opportunity for us to continue to do more. So and appreciate that. To your point, Board Member, it's also about the resources then to even conduct the work, and never finding ourselves over-resourced, so needing to make sure we're coordinating well. Other board colleagues with questions or thoughts? And I can, if not, I can go to our public commenter, Ms. Melissa Hathaway McKeith.
So good morning, and thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation. Some of you know me because I typically call in about the Salton Sea, and hopefully I'll be more successful on this issue than I've been on that in the last 20 years. But I see the same level of urgency at the local urban areas, and the conflicts and lack of coordination between the air quality, heat island goals, and the conservation measures that are being required by the State Water Resources Control Board. How this is playing out on the ground in particular involves urban water management plans and the constant demand on water, which is a zero-sum game, to facilitate development, housing development, and water transfers in urban areas without the consideration needed for how much water needs to be set aside, to address climate and greenhouse down the road. In other words, I'm talking about trees. And to bring this home, I'm in the city of Riverside. The city of Riverside has more water than many jurisdictions. We also have urban agriculture, and we also have, unfortunately, hot weather and contaminate pollution particularly from diesel trucks driving from the Port of Los Angeles to all the Amazon warehouses. Our survival in the next 25 and 50 years is going to depend a lot on how much water we can retain as a baseline for trees and urban forests and urban agriculture. And unfortunately, the priorities of conservation that are set forth by the State Water Resources Control Board, and even the way climate is discussed in the urban water management planning guidelines, means that the consultants and even our local agencies who would like to tackle this issue are at a loss on how to measure the amount of water needed for treescapes and, for example, the governor's 30-30 plan. How would we measure it? And how do those priorities conflict with other priorities? And we need help. It is also very opaque over at the Department of Water Resources, unlike your agency, in terms of trying to figure out who's there to help. How can local environmental justice and environmental organizations get assistance to make sure that these considerations are actually given time? And I can tell you that, at least in our situation, consultants were hired last week. The plan is due in July. By the time the plan is presented to the public, there will be no organic input into it, and it will get adopted. And I don't think that that is intentional on anybody's part, but I can see how the State Water Resources Control Board is cited as one of the reasons why we have to conserve more, particularly with outside watering and ornamental watering. And there's no real mandate to specifically address and set aside water for climate in terms of air quality. So in the very short period of time I have, I just would like to bring this to staff's attention. There were a lot of macro issues that were discussed, but for folks on the ground, we could really use better guidance, better coordination between CARB, DWR, and the State Water Resources Control Board, and even some workshops at the local level that would help our agencies determine how they can, in fact, balance these conflicting issues and make sure in 25 or 50 years that we're not all brown. So thank you very much. See you on the 7th about the Salton Sea.
Thank you, Ms. McKeith. I really appreciate those comments. I'll let actually Vice Chair Diadamo speak here, because I know this has been a particular focus of hers, going back to the last drought, where the Vice Chair really did continue to highlight the need to preserve what are these urban tree canopies that have all these benefits and not see those sacrificed because of the restrictions and otherwise. And I think we're certainly in the middle currently of developing what are both indoor recommendations for conservation and efficiency, long-term efficiency, but also outdoor discussions and working partner hand in hand with DWR. So your comments are well received, certainly from me. I'll let the Vice Chair speak here, certainly again, because I know this has been a priority of hers.
Thank you, Chair Esquivel. Yes, I have been tracking this issue in terms of how it fits in with the development of the conservation, the outdoor conservation piece. And I'll let Mr. Gomberg talk about the specifics here, but I know that our staff has been working with some stakeholder groups and academic institutions in the Department of Water Resources on how best to address this issue to move forward with greater outdoor efficiency, but not have it result in unintended consequences of loss of urban forests. And I'm even interested in seeing what we can do to further incentivize, even where trees have not been planted, you know, out of concern of transferring or movement away from turf and to other landscapes that could result in heat island effects. And so, Ms. McKeith, I would welcome the opportunity to chat with you further about this, and I'd like to have Mr. Gomberg and others from our staff participate in the conversation. So if you could please, just at your convenience, follow up with me, and I'd like to chat with you further. And Mr. Gomberg, please add any further specifics.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, and I appreciate Ms. McKeith's comments, and we'll definitely follow up as you suggest, Vice Chair Diadamo. I think there are a number of intersecting issues here, and we really need to tackle them all in a comprehensive way. And I think the process we have going to develop these outdoor standards offers that opportunity. As you mentioned, there are parts of the state with existing tree canopy, and that tree canopy really is essential to maintaining shade and not having tremendous heat impacts and public health impacts as temperatures rise. There are parts of the state, particularly urban areas with disadvantaged communities, that do not have adequate tree canopy and disproportionately suffer from heat impacts. And I think we have an opportunity, again, as part of this collaborative effort, to look at how do we leverage overall state resources, combine those with local resources, and really support climate resilient tree planting. And I know you and I have talked before, right, about we can't continue to repeat past mistakes of planting coast redwoods in the San Joaquin Valley. Those trees are not suitable to that climate. So we have to make sure we're getting the right trees in the right places to support those public health and heat reduction goals, which are, again, so critical, particularly in the hotter parts of the state. In Southern California and in the Southern San Joaquin Valley. And again, I think we have the opportunity as part of this standard setting process. We have, as you know, the ability as a board with input from the department and stakeholders to create variances as part of our standards. Certainly one for trees where we don't have tree canopy existing. I think that's an important one to develop and see whether there is a material impact on water use. If there is, we should be making allowances for it, because absolutely there are communities in the state right now that really could benefit from that tree canopy. And of course, we do want to ensure that our messaging is clear, that people should be maintaining existing tree canopy for all the benefits that it brings, and also that those irrigation practices for existing trees are efficient, whether those are trees in medians, whether those are trees on commercial properties or residential trees, front yard, backyard trees. So again, there are a number of interlocking issues here, but overall, I think we can, as is oft said, walk and chew gum at the same time. We can maintain our overall focus on water use efficiency and conservation, while at the same time ensuring that we maintain healthy tree canopy and develop healthy tree canopy for communities that haven't had it. And we have the tools to do so. So this is an important issue, and definitely we want to be part of the ongoing discussions, and the board has a critical role here with the development of these regulations. And we also have the opportunity, I should mention, now more than ever with aerial imagery technology to understand across the entire state what does it look like from a top-down view, and that really will help making these sort of water supplier by water supplier assessments, parcel level assessments of what we need and where.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gomberg. And thank you again, Vice Chair, for continuing to advocate in this space, and Ms. McKeith for flagging a very, very important and good point here for us. And please do, again, continue to engage. I think as Max, Mr. Gomberg said here, we do have continued opportunity here as we develop the outdoor regs to consider just this and ensure that we aren't having negative consequences as we meet what are important efficiency goals as well. And to Mr. Gomberg's point as well, there is actually a really critical data component already built into this activity where we will have and do have better understanding of the existing tree canopies and then opportunities otherwise. So to your point about quantifying even the need and getting to the specific numbers around it, I think there is that space and opportunity. So just thank you again for really flagging that in this good discussion. Fellow board colleagues, anything further to comment or discuss here? Please welcome the discussion here amongst us.
Great. Yeah, I wanted to actually suggest that maybe we could have some more discussion between us. I have some thoughts, and not for decision making today, but just more as an opportunity to use this to discuss between the board members, because that all needs and should happen in the public. So I think that we have, Chair Esquivel, you suggested, is it time to start thinking about, do we update the resolution? I think Mr. Gomberg, I really appreciate the discussion around performance metrics and how we start thinking about outcomes. And I know that has been a priority an issue that I think many of us have brought up and discussed within the kind of strategic action plan priorities process that we do and also with the performance report that we do annually, and how do all these pieces fit together? How do we think about some outcome goals and how we might track that? And I think this presentation really helps to pull some examples of where we are doing that and can be doing that. And so I wanted to just, I guess, suggest, and I think Chair Esquivel, you put out there, maybe we could talk about, does it make sense to have this be a listening year for update to the resolution? My thought is maybe what we could do is use this as an opportunity to kind of narrow in on maybe like 5, overall outcome areas that we could start to develop that would be priorities that the board has set. And I think some of the ones today might fit into those top 5. I'd love to talk about that if this makes sense. But that could be kind of that we could have some, say 5, keep it simple, keep it focused, 5 areas of outcomes that we could set non-binding goals for, that could be, rooted in what our current understanding is based on the data that we have, but could provide both the ability to track outcomes, adapt, reflect, inform how we're developing our programs, and also could be kind of the context or help could be the context somewhat, not that it has to be a limiting context, but could be the context for how we do our annual strategic action plan priorities discussion. It's, I think it's helpful to think about, we have these broad goals within that in terms of the topics that we're trying to advance. And so to the extent that we're able to maybe have some outcome goals that are related to that, they don't have to be, again, limiting what the strategic priorities are, but providing some context to that could help us, be able to step back and take a really focused and provide some grounding of what we're trying to do as a board. How are our programs, working to advance those overall goals from an outcome perspective, which we don't have complete control over. It's not the same as a performance report where we do our, where we can really track kind of what the actions are that we're doing, but it would be more broader. How are things changing that can help inform maybe what we're setting as our priorities within our action plan. And just to give some more specifics, because I think this can sound very broad and not concrete. So I just, as examples of what these areas could be, just based on what was presented today and what we've talked about in the past, and also what we already have. I think that's going to be key, right? We're not trying to necessarily, at least at this point, we're not trying to develop whole new systems, whole new goals in terms of outcomes for the board, but just pulling together, a few priority issues that we can track and sort of formalize within that, at least that we could continue to iterate on. So just as examples, I think we have talked about the kind of most straightforward one that we already have is around recycled water goals. I think it's a great example of how we have some reporting that in place. We're continuing to iterate on that. So we have a goal, it might be too ambitious. We're continuing to iterate on that. That one really is kind of more codified. And so what I was thinking is this doesn't necessarily have to be, this wouldn't be a rulemaking or framed within anything like that. It would be more of a adaptive, we could have short-term goals and long-term goals that could just be, somewhat aspirational and set to be able to track I think what was talked about today around stormwater and thinking how, storms is looking at how we are diversifying and increasing our ability to capture water sources to diversify things. I wonder if that could be something that could evolve as we start to develop that. So that wouldn't be something we'd be ready to do now, but maybe there's a goal around kind of diversification of water resources that could include water recycling and stormwater capture and use. Again, with the sense that we have recycling, we don't yet have the stormwater piece. I think another one is we talked about that was highlighted here was just around greenhouse gas reductions within, again, to the extent we have data on this, it seems like we do have that within the co-digestion area. And I think it seems like we have that also within the financial investments we're making in terms of some reporting we're already having to do within SAFER, or because our funding sources already require it, we're able to some degree report on greenhouse gas reductions estimates from the investments that we're doing. I don't know that any of these are the right ones. I'm just throwing out examples of where we could do this and what the kind of 5 areas say might be based on what maybe we already have available. Other ones are, conservation and efficiency. I think very clearly we have the water use reporting that Mr. Gomberg already highlighted. And maybe over time, we could look at how to add some other water use efficiency outcomes metrics that maybe we don't have good data on now, but we could develop. So an example is I know we're really trying to improve our annual water rights reporting. And so as we start to get at least good reporting in terms of the quality of data from especially the large water users, maybe we can just think about how do we track and understand beyond urban water use, how our state is changing in terms of water use that we regulate or administer. And again, I don't know that that's the right one. That's more for the future, but just throwing out where sort of brainstorms of where I've been thinking and then the 4th area would be, kind of where the vulnerable communities and racial equity come in. And again, I think I'm thinking about within the context of climate change, we have the SAFER program is doing a huge amount of tracking and goals and reporting. So again, that's something we already have that I think we have goals that we can track and we are tracking. So being able to kind of recognize that and pull that into that overall outcome, sort of focused outcome priority setting and tracking that we are looking at overall as sort of a strategic priority setting. And then just what this presentation made me think of, and I think maybe a little bit harder, but within the SAFER program, we are pulling in, within all the analysis we're already doing, work around vulnerability to climate change in terms of water supply and resiliency efforts and the sort of investments around that. And so I think to the extent we can pull that out specifically within what we're already doing, that would be great. Again, maybe for the future. So those are, I think, just summarizing, those are kind of 4 areas I was thinking maybe you could break them up differently. So it's 5, I don't know. But the sort of diversification of water sources in terms of recycled water and eventually stormwater, greenhouse gas reductions, to the extent we're able to quantify that in our, in the programs where we are, conservation and water use efficiency and water use changes, again, where we'd be ready to do that in urban area, I think less ready to do that maybe in others, but could develop that over time. And then 4th being the vulnerable communities and racial equity resilience. So that's a lot. I think I was trying to be a little bit more concrete here in terms of how we might think about this, and just would love to get, some discussion at the board meeting, again, with not the intent of making any decisions now, but just trying to share thoughts and see if we can flesh out these sorts of ideas more.
Well, if I might jump in, and I apologize, there's some noisy workmen out there. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Wow, a discussion of performance metrics, especially outcome-based performance metrics, initiated by staff and now Board Member Firestone. I think my work here is done. I'm so happy to hear this. No, thank you very much. And I certainly support what Board Member Firestone has raised. I think given the breadth and complexity of climate change and everything involved in the resolution, the idea of focusing down on a few key areas that line up with the board's priorities, that access information that we are collecting or will be collecting, and that is integrated into hopefully the next version of the climate change resolution, so that we have some specific areas which we can focus on, track, and measure progress would be wonderful. I would just add, I guess, one component to it. Oh, and by the way, I do like some of the suggestions that you offered also, Board Member Firestone. I think, some of them, the stormwater, the recycled water are definitely metrics that we have access to and should be tracking. And I like that you integrated the community water system and their vulnerability and sustainability resiliency going forward, because I think one is critical. Two, it's an area that we're investing a lot of focus, attention, priority to. So again, a priority that should be measured. And three, it will be a little bit more challenging than stormwater or recycled water. And I think it's good to have both things that we can easily measure and things that we need to work, strive, and strategize for. So I like that mix that you proposed. And the only additional comment I would make is one of the things that I have always hoped for with respect to the performance measures and our performance report feature is that we engage stakeholders in the process so that they take ownership of the metrics, they take ownership of the information gathering, and they make use of the information that we provide. And so, and since we, I think, have a little bit of time before you look at the next iteration of the resolution to do this, and in identifying these areas to focus on in developing the metrics, I would strongly suggest, and I know you would agree, that we engage key stakeholders in the process and help them take ownership of this and help us in moving forward in these critical areas. So that's my only addition. Otherwise, great suggestion, and I fully support it. Thank you.
I appreciate the discussion and suggestions, and yeah, I think we should definitely continue to think through how best that all fits together. Because I think to your point, Board Member Dodak, the performance metrics and standards that that whole performance review and report that we do yearly should be a tool and used and think through, what do we get, where can we tuck in some of the work in that yearly performance review, those metrics, the data we're collecting there, or even understanding, knowing that that's, more kind of our internal widgets. Oftentimes it's number of, permits, it's different, but that is all, part of this. And so thinking how we don't reinvent the wheel and some of how we track and where we have tracking going on of different things is important, because what does come to mind is the fact that we are going to be updating our recycled water policy. And it is more probably fitting to have a lot of that metric discussion and specific policy work kind of tucked into those efforts. But I think that there's ways that, climate is the lens that we view so much of our work. So thinking through, well, what are then, these climate specific sort of metrics, or what it is that we can easily convert from, existing data, and then where we need perhaps additional is important. I think it just, for me, it's knowing that we're resource thin and then thinking through what needs to be part of then that recycled water policy work and review and, metric thought there, as opposed to, what's in the climate resolution and how it all kind of fits therein, because the programs, I think of the drinking water program, Safer as well, are in the middle of developing those metrics, internally to that program, and it's kind of how best is that all translated out in a way that doesn't duplicate work, but makes it easier just to understand and track the efficacy of our efforts.
Agreed. Most definitely, we should be integrating, coordinating, talking with each other across the programs, not reinventing things. And certainly, as we look at updating various policies as well as permits, like stormwater, permit, definitely keeping an eye on what the priority metrics are and engaging the stakeholder in that process, I think is important. And then of course that feeds into whatever update to the climate resolution that comes before the board next year.
Yeah, and our yearly process of our strategic work plan, right? And so it's just making sure that is all, additive to itself and not kind of, creating things that can become stale if we don't think about how it's actually integrated more in that programmatic way that staff are just, kind of producing the work, if that makes sense. Mr. Bishop, do you have some thoughts?
Well, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. And so I'm going to use an example. The board has made a priority of infiltrating stormwater, and we've done that in a number of permits. And in the industrial permit, we gave essentially an alternate compliance approach that captured and infiltrate the 85th percentile storm event. What we've heard back is that that is attractive to a number of industrial stormwater facilities, but we included a requirement that the water that's infiltrated meets all MCLs before infiltration, and that has discouraged many facilities from doing this because the soil itself has metals that exceed the MCL. And so as part of the feedback to try and address that, we're going to look at the appropriateness of using all MCLs in the pre-infiltration stage. And I think that is kind of the cycle that Board Member Firestone was talking about. We make a priority generally of more recycled, we implement it through a permit, we evaluate how that permit works, we correct where there are obstacles that were unforeseen, and in the next iteration of the permit, we try and address those to see if that actually increases the amount that's infiltrated. And so it becomes an iterative process based on the feedback that we get from the project. It's not totally metrics driven because we don't yet capture the amount that's infiltrated, but it's anecdotal at this time. If that's what we're talking about, I think we can focus, like with stormwater and recycled water, what are we doing to implement that, and is that reaching the outcome that we expect?
Yeah, I think that's a great example of that kind of iteration, and also of how really we're doing this throughout every program that we do, is constantly learning and reflecting and building that in. So I think that the challenge here, and to your point, Chair Escobar, there are things that in some ways all of our regulatory program builds in this iterative cycle of setting goals, trying to implement it, or develop requirements for implementation, trying to reflect on whether it's accomplishing the goals and continuing to iterate that. So I think what I'm thinking of is not to change that in any way. I think embrace that as exactly how things should and are working. But just thinking about as a board, and I'll just throw out there, maybe rather than doing, continuing to do updates to resolutions, maybe even just recognizing that it's a priority. Like, we have the resiliency portfolio. This is a priority for, resiliency is a priority for this board and this administration. We have, when we look at our annual, strategic work plan, I'm not getting into it, but that strategic work plan, we have these big goals, right, that are really all about resiliency at the end of the day, in some ways, or some kind of outcomes. And we're not going to have perfect outcome metrics for each of those, but I think they give us kind of some broad categories that that might be helpful for staff within all of our regulatory programs to just hear kind of reiterated that, these are the priorities that the board has for ultimately what we're trying to achieve in some way of trying to be able to quantify and track that, which will need to improve over time because we don't have perfect data. And, and also just that I think because the idea that these both get stale and that they, well, I think resolutions a lot of times get stale, and also the, that the goals that we might set now, we might learn are not the right goals. And so those, I think I like the idea of maybe having this not take the place of the regulatory, cycle of iteration, but really kind of be a less, more just a priority guidance, big picture, a small number of things that that might be helpful to staff just to hear from the board. These are the things we're trying to achieve here, and we have these sort of narrative goals, I would say, but having some maybe more metric goals that complement that, and again, aren't perfect. That just, I don't know if that helps provide a little more color.
Yeah, and maybe just even, again, knowing it's not even about setting those goals. On the recycled water policy side, there already is one, right? In the water resiliency portfolio, we already have those. So yeah, it's maybe just better understanding where those are. And even on the safe and affordable drinking water fund, the SAFER program, there are, yearly goals being set, as part of number of systems we're wanting to touch, consolidations. I guess, again, it's, it's kind of there, and it's always been the board's challenge is how best to communicate it out in a way that, brings some clarity to what is a huge portfolio of work, whether on the drinking water, water quality, water rights, financial assistance side. And again, I think there's many ways that these goals are already existing, so maybe it's just better understanding those. This is an extension, I know, of our discussion in many ways of our strategic work plan, and how we're using that, how that, and again, I want to kind of limit the number of places where we have like new kind of, goal setting or kind of tools, but instead making sure the ones that are existing within the programs are connecting better to, these discussions for us, because, the more that we understand our work clearly through, where there's appropriate metrics that we can track, again, how much water recycling is going on in the state, how much infiltration are we doing on the stormwater side? How much are we conserving? There's ways that, we can do better. And so I appreciate this discussion, and let's continue to kind of refine internally and externally and figure out where it best lives in some of this, because it's not unique to just say the climate work that we're doing. Again, it is almost more a function and a discussion around our yearly strategic work plan and how that gets to be more reflected by, again, or informed by rather these goals that we can, generally, I think, agree kind of and can set and or already exist and or already being tracked in some way.
So I would agree with all of that and really value this discussion today. And thank you for taking the time to have this conversation about the goals. On principle, I agree with the notion of having performance targets. I think that makes sense. These categories all also are very logical to me too. The nature that they should take, and whether, as you said, Chair Esquivel, whether they're targets that already exist in some form, like with stormwater capture, DWR has a published stormwater capture potential, but that's out there. But as John Bishop just mentioned, there's limitations there in terms of what's actually realistically possible that the DWR recommendation probably wasn't able to process at that resolution. So for me, it's almost like, like a climate needs analysis assessment, right? It's thinking through, where are those gaps in terms of what the trajectory that we're on here as a state in terms of making needed investments for climate change adaptation in all these categories. Where are we today? How do we benchmark that? And how do we think through, where do we go from here as a state? And on some level, that's not our job necessarily to set exactly what those numbers are, but I do think there's value in establishing aspirational targets in some cases, like with recycled water. I think having that number out there for 2030, whether it was the exact right number or whether it's high, has been helpful to the entire community as a driver for investment, whether it's financial incentives or just individual communities sort of rallying around that cause and seeing the opportunities. And I think, you look at all these different categories and each one has its own merit. And so I don't have an answer for what this looks like, but I do think there's a lot of value in continuing to think through this. So let's keep talking.
Thank you, Board Member. Thank you, Board Member Firestone as well. Yeah, good suggestions here, and appreciate the thought given to some of the buckets. And I think let's continue to discuss further for sure.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. And we do have one additional speaker, and so we can call up Mr. Douglas Deach.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
I've missed being able to communicate with you since my last communication. Just to refresh your recollection, is a number of months ago, and what I had requested was that the board review my testimony from 2016, where for the first time I requested that the State Water Resources Control Board intervene in the Monterey Bay. And I don't know whether that's been accomplished yet or not. Is it Mr. Laufer? Is he present there?
I am, Mr. Deach.
Okay, good. Okay, because anyway, that's fine. I just want to make sure you're there because we did converse about this. So what I'd like you to please do, following up on that, because this is part of the, what my suggestions, because I do have answers and I'd like to communicate them to you. But first, the history of this is at, you can review this if you haven't. I don't know that you have or haven't, but this is when
Mr. Deach, I apologize to interrupt you. This item that we're currently taking comments on.
No, I know.
Okay.
Actually, this all has to do with that. But we don't have to worry about the comment now, and I'll just, what I said before. I'm going to say it again. I please request that the State Water Resources Control Board intervene in the Monterey Bay, and I'm going to send you a specific, why that should happen. Now, in terms of recycled water, I don't know if you've had a discussion about direct potable reuse, but my number one priority would be to, in the coastal areas, only be using direct potable reuse recycled water. Because as you're aware, the Coastal Commission has made a projection of 3.5 for projects, 3.5 feet of sea level rise in the next 30 years. If you go to minute 5 at 42 seconds at SacramentoRealEstate.com, San Francisco Realestate.com, San Diego Realestate.com, you'll see a 12-minute video in the Vice channel, and at that 5-minute 42 seconds, you'll see Dr. Mount in 2015 testifying that 1 foot of sea level rise will permanently salt up a great portion of the delta. Now, the vast majority of the water, food, and real estate resources in the world's 5th biggest and most important economy is inextricably tied to the water in the San Francisco Bay, the Delta, this state's biggest reservoir, which is, of course, our snowpack, and the 8% or 9% of the agricultural production occurring on 1% of the arable acreage, which I got from your figures in the Central Valley. Now, so 3.5 feet is, if that did occur in the next 30 years, that is something that I don't see being addressed at all. Now, the way I propose that be addressed is that there be a feasibility study on whether or not we're going to have to possibly put a few dams across the Golden Gate. Now, that's something that I'm concerned about. If the sea level rise does occur, you're going to protect yourself. Now, another thing that I mentioned at the last meeting was a recent study that had been done by two scientists at Riverside about coronavirus not being possibly not being effectively treatable out of the injected water that's going to be put in the okay. So let me just run it down, so then I'll get off. Now. So I hope you've done that. And the other aspect I'm interested in is, so that's my kind of solution for the balance of the state outside of water solution, is maybe we'll have to dam the Golden Gate, okay, to protect all these resources. But in the Monterey Bay, we have a different problem. There's nothing to dam. So the only way we can deal with that is basically to create what I call the 21,000-acre Monterey Bay Estuary National Monument, which would be done by acquiring two tracts of land, 9,000 acres of irrigated land between Manresa Beach on the ocean side of Highway 1 and Elkhorn Slough. That's the kind of the area, 9,000 acres there, that is causing the problem in the Pajaro Valley. And then the other tract of land is 12,000 acres attached to the Castroville Reclamation Plant. It's called Blanco Tract. It's the best farmland in the world, 12,000 acres. The production, which could be 31,000 acre feet of recycled water that is produced by the could be produced by the Castroville plant if it was being used efficiently. When these two tracts of land, 21,000 acres, the fair market value is 50,000 as farmland. However, the highest and best use of this land is not as farmland, but it's rather as a water conservation, groundwater recharge, and habitat conservation project, where these 21,000 acres would be.
Mr. Deach, I apologize. Yep. You've reached your 5 minutes here, but I did appreciate your comments around water recycling here, and it sounds like identification of, it seems, additional projects here in the Pajaro Valley region. So thank you. I really do appreciate your comments.
Can I say one other thing?
Quickly,
one other thing?
Yes.
And I'll be bringing this. Thank you. I'll be bringing this all up in my campaign as recall a candidate for governor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Deach. This isn't the platform for that political. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And any additional comments on our climate change item for fellow board members? Hearing none, then I think I appreciate everyone's good discussion here, including Mr. Deach and his points on water recycling, and otherwise then conclude this informational item. And so thank you, everyone. That brings us now to our next item, which is board member reports. And I'd entertain any reports from my fellow board colleagues.
I can start. I just wanted to update on two things. I got a briefing on a report that UCLA had done on drinking water challenges in Southeast LA. And it looked both at the fact that, our lowest income, these areas of very high poverty and communities of color in Southeast LA are getting not only some of the poorest quality water in terms of primarily secondary contaminants, but also some of the very highest water rates, and kind of exploring both maybe some of the context for why that's happening and thinking about recommendations for how to address that. It also was really interesting reflection on sativa, how that went, what lessons learned there are from that administrator process, and consolidation potential in that region. So anyway, encourage folks that are interested to read it. It was really fascinating. I think in some ways it points to more work to be done. Again, I think it helped point to both the need to continue to try to advance how we deal with secondary contaminants on our end, and learn within our SAFER program in general, think about consolidations and administrators, and just advance opportunities for affordability mechanisms and learning about what the barriers are to doing that. It was interesting. One of the things that was really new to me was that a number of the areas that are paying the highest water rates were ones where they had lost or didn't have, for various reasons, any groundwater pumping rights within the adjudicated basin. So the community had no drinking water pumping rates. And so that meant it was entirely reliant on imported water, which is generally 2 to even 3 times as expensive. So that's directly passed on to consumers. So just, I think, encourage folks to dig into that. It's by UCLA, and actually I should find the exact title, but I think if you Google UCLA and Southeast LA drinking water, you'll be able to find it. And then the other thing I just was going to give an update on is I've been really trying to pay attention to the ongoing efforts to look at how we can address the kinds of financial impacts to drinking water consumers and water systems that we saw from the COVID survey. Great news is that there's additional funding from the federal government. It's still, even with, when you add together what we are likely to get from the feds between these 2 relief packages, it's still maybe only like 10% of the overall need that we found in our survey as of January, which is probably continuing to grow. So it's a very inadequate amount to fully address the need in our state, but also one that is vital, that we use most effectively, and that we really figure out how to prioritize. And I think there's a lot of thoughts going on. We still don't have guidelines from the federal government on what those, how that funding, what the constraints on that funding will be for the states. And I think we have talked with our sister agencies within the state about how to coordinate amongst us a bit, and are really, I think, certainly committed to making sure that as the state, especially once we have those guidelines from the feds, that we can have some kind of a public, even though we want to get this money out quickly, like some kind of public workshop or opportunity to have some effective public input on how that money should be prioritized and administered in the state. And I know in general, that's such a priority for this board, is making sure that these sorts of priority settings are and program development is transparent and through a public process. So I don't know. I know our Chair Esquivel, you've really been the lead for us on this. So I don't know if you wanted to add any more, but I know that's something that I've been paying a lot of attention to, and want to just take the opportunity to share with the fellow board members and the public.
Thank you, board member. Yeah, nothing to add at this point. I think we're just working internally with our agencies. Nothing really to speak to public yet, but to your point, want to just continue the good cooperation and engagement we've had with our state water agencies, NGO groups, EJ groups, even in the development of the data that is helping feed this really important discussion. So I just thank you for highlighting. I think it is important to flag. Mr. Gomberg, I think, wants to maybe add a couple of things, and we've been working intensely internally around all this. But Mr. Gomberg, yes.
Yes, if I may, just really briefly. So on that point, I do, because I know other board members have asked for an update, and I do hope that in either the next board meeting or the meeting after that, we'll be at a point where we're able to sort of share publicly sort of the results of that interagency collaboration on the debt relief. So I did just want to note that. And then also to Board Member Firestone's earlier point, myself, Mr. Polhemus, and some of the other staff were also briefed on that UCLA report. on Southeast LA and the implications there. And I think, we are thinking through, how we can better inform our programs, both sort of safer, affordability, just drinking water overall. I think it is very insightful. So just wanted to make those.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate those. And yes, thank you, board member, for flagging the report. It definitely continues to bring home the point that the solution sets for various communities throughout the state are going to be different because the challenges are different. And so, when we talk about small systems in urban Los Angeles or just urban settings, different than the challenges we see small systems and more rural settings facing. Although, there's still certainly lessons in between them that are mutual. But yes, thank you. And I'm glad you engaged with folks at UCLA on that. I know our former board colleague, Madam Glickfeld, really was great about leading a lot of that, and really appreciate her continued cooperation and coordination even now still. And really appreciated leadership. So thank you. I'll quickly gloss. On March 5th, I am part of the California Water Data Consortium's steering committee. And we had a meeting recently where we've agreed to move forward. And this is, exciting for me, certainly with the cross-pollination here, with assisting the Delta Measurement Consortium with moving forward and trying to see if we can use OpenET, which is an open evapotranspiration platform that was developed with partners at Environmental Defense Fund, Google, NASA, JPL, and with much cooperation and coordination with our Delta Water Master, Mr. Michael George, to develop an alternative way to measure perhaps diversions and water use through ET, and do so in a way that can really help with water management. Looking to translate that then to an actual application within the Delta is something that this consortium, this measurement consortium, which is led by our Delta Water Master, but includes a whole host of other folks, have been trying to figure out how to take the project to the next level. And so the Water Data Consortium has agreed to take it on as a project to explore then further, and just excited to get you all briefed on that, and know that when it came up at the Water Data Consortium's meeting, it was very welcome. Again, we aren't over-resourced when it comes to a lot of these data systems and platform discussions, and so these external collaborations are really critical. And so just want to thank Tara Moran and others at the Water Data Consortium for their leadership there. The only other thing I'd flag is on March 9th, I was honored to join the secretaries and our ambassador from Denmark and their Secretary of Environment to join in a memorandum of understanding signing, an MOU signing between California and the nation of Denmark. The MOU will help advance work that we've already been in, partnerships we've already been involved in. And this is an update to an MOU that first was signed during the drought, actually. And so there are projects out there like the electromagnetic resistance mapping of surface and then subsurface layers. So they're being able to understand where there's sand versus clay versus other soil types within a landscape, to figure out how best to do things like groundwater recharge, find out where there are conduits and how to best site projects. Really exciting, groundbreaking work that is done by actually floating just a huge magnet, basically elevated from a crane, or apologies, from a helicopter, and just brought over the land to be able to identify, again, the subsurface features. So it's really great partnerships like that we've been able to maximize to ensure that there's this flow of ideas and technology between the nation of Denmark, who are really leaders in many ways in protecting their groundwater resources here to the state and California. So just want to flag that great signing and the incredible work that's been an outgrowth of it, and look forward to then the continued projects that will be generated in the MOU, including ones tied to wastewater and how we better look at the circular economy something we just touched on here in our climate change update. So fun work, and just appreciate the opportunities. Other board member reports?
I don't have too much. I will just say that I went to each of my three, virtually to each of my three regional board liaison responsibilities last week. Los Angeles Regional Board, Santa Ana Regional Board, and Lahontan. And so I had given an update to each, and I provided the same update to each board. And what I did was which was helpful for me, and what I did was presented our strategic work plan for 2021. And this is going back to the theme of better integration, continued to improve integration between the state and regional boards, and it seemed to be well received. Frankly, they each have their own priority process, and it was important to say up front, this is not, this was just information for them, and they certainly should prioritize their goals however they wish, in whatever format they wish. I just wanted to share with them where we were headed at the state board level for the year. And they each actually, I think they mostly follow fiscal year timelines, and so I think it worked out pretty well in their planning cycle. So, and there were a number of new board members, particularly in Los Angeles, new and returning board members. And so I think, they all appreciated hearing sort of the update and latest as to where, what our priorities are. So just wanted to flag that for you all. But other than that, I didn't have any other public functions the last couple of weeks.
Thank you, board member. Vice Chair?
I think that that's actually, I know you're not suggesting that we all do that, but I'm going to take it as a suggestion and provide the actual plan. I know I've mentioned it to board members before at the regions, but a brief presentation I think is a very good idea. I don't have much to add other than that we had a quarterly meeting for the San Joaquin Valley Partnership, and I know I've raised it's not necessarily in our lane directly, but the issue of broadband access and how it impacts our programs, both public participation and compliance, reporting and that sort of thing. And I'll just report that for me, we received an update on the various bills that are that the legislature is considering, and also received a report from FCC's program on emergency broadband benefit program, and how that fits in with some of the other programs that we have in California. But for me, the takeaway was really the early findings of a pilot project that's in Fresno County, broadband infrastructure mapping pilot. And they basically just take a region and provide a review of not just broadband access, but kind of how throughout the day there are challenges with broadband connectivity that we all experience, but seeing this through an actual pilot and getting additional information as far as how it impacts the numbers in any given community, and it's quite concerning. And then the other piece that my takeaway was that in many areas, especially in disadvantaged communities, their access to the actual computer oftentimes is through their children that they receive from school, or their cell phones. And so when we consider, communities that are accessing reports or small farmers or permittees that are having to comply with monitoring reports, and the actual hardware that they're using, and that, if it's cell phones, just to consider that as well, just the difficulty in accessing not just connectivity, but difficulty in processing and obtaining reports through a cell phone.
Vice Chair, can I just ask you a follow-up on that? Because I so agree with that challenge, and that you know, there are really direct ways that interfaces with us being able to do our programs and get effective both engagement and compliance. I'm wondering if, you know, through the work you've seen with the partnership, and you mentioned that one pilot, but are there good, you know, sources of information that could be shared with us around where there's broadband access that doesn't, you know, the hardware is a whole separate issue to some degree in terms of being able to understand that context and need, but especially on broadband, it seems like there's probably some good resources I'm guessing, of where that's more available or not. And I'm just wondering if, you know, to the extent that you're able to share that, and it might be helpful I know our Office of Public Participation has really been doing a lot of thought around remote access with disadvantaged communities, but more broadly for the board to understand, you know, where those limitations are within our programs and that the folks we're dealing with, both in terms of engagement and compliance.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a map of the whole state that shows broadband access, and it's mapped out in a color format so that you can get a better sense of strong access and depending on the different level. But what was helpful with this pilot is just to see how even if an area is classified as having broadband access, that sometimes, you know, it can be quite intermittent depending upon the time of day and that sort of thing. So I will circulate through Ms. Sobek both pieces of information, the pilot and the PowerPoint that we received on the pilot out of Fresno, and then the map of California with respect to broadband.
Great, thanks.
I just have one thing to report since there's a leaf blower coming my way. The San Francisco Bay Regional Water Board met last week, and the one thing I wanted to share with you was they received an update on something called Bay Adapt. It's a regional collaborative effort established by BDCP, the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, yes, CDC, and it ties into the, you know, obviously the climate change discussion we just had. By the way, thank you, Board Member McGuire, for bringing up the innovation by the regional water boards and what they are doing on climate change adaptation. But I wanted to bring to your attention this Bay Adapt process because they're working collaboratively to develop some guidelines for all the agencies to identify priority actions. And essentially, it's a commitment to take action on a regional level to address sea level rise, to seek funding for local projects for resiliency. It's a tremendous effort staffed by the BCDC staff and with participation by the Regional Water Board. They did a great series of presentations. And for Board Member Firestone, one of the things that they're focusing on is community capacity building to, you know, develop the capacity for these communities, especially disadvantaged communities, to participate in the process in developing this framework, this plan. So very exciting stuff going on there that I wanted to bring to your attention.
Thank you so much, board member. That is exciting and really, really great work. It is, again, our regions are leading in incredible ways. And so really appreciate everyone's liaison to the regions and being able to continue to make sure we're connecting as many dots as we possibly can on this work. So thank you. Thank you everyone for your reports. That concludes our board member report item and brings us to our last item of the day, which is our executive director report. Ms. Sobek, do you have anything you'd like to highlight in your report, and or otherwise just thank you as always for what is quite the compendium?
No, I don't have anything in particular to highlight in this report. Happy to answer any questions, but now or individually with board members if there's anything they want us to elaborate on.
I'll just flag, I know as part of our earlier discussion around climate change a bit and then the storms program, I think we were maybe seeing if there's some additional specific information around storms that would be helpful to put into the executive director's report. So I think that was just a flag. And I know that came up earlier. And so maybe we'll just see on the next executive director or some future iteration if there is something more to add to storms, although I believe there is a storm section in there that I saw. So
yeah, we'll do that, and I believe that there was a request that we have a storms update.
Yes, yeah, as well.
We'll, as we're working on scheduling, we'll figure out when that makes sense to do.
Okay, thank you. And quick note on scheduling, and just acknowledge that tomorrow's workshop for the Salton Sea will not be occurring at 2 o'clock as previously scheduled, and instead that will be happening now on on April 7th, Wednesday, April 7th. And so thank you everyone that was, I know, prepared, but needed some time, as we were hearing, for folks to digest what is a little more of a lengthier document from the Resources Agency and update, and glad to provide folks the time to come prepared to the workshop to discuss what is another of the many critical issues certainly there before the board, but one of the more challenging as well. With that, that concludes Executive Director report. I believe we have a closed session that we will be, I think we should certainly have a lunch here. And Mr. Laufer, if you don't have a sense otherwise, I was going to maybe recommend our closed session start at 1. Okay, good, thank you. Then we will resume closed session at 1 o'clock. We will recess then until then, and also tomorrow we still have a workshop in the morning though on division of drinking water, and so please do know that that is still occurring. It's just our afternoon workshop that will has been postponed. Am I forgetting anything, Mr. Laufer?
No, that's it. We will be in recess, and I will just point out that the start time tomorrow is a little bit different, both for board members and anyone listening. We will begin at 9:30 in the morning.
Thank you. Important flag there. So we'll see everyone tomorrow morning at 9:30, and otherwise we'll see my fellow board colleagues here in closed session at 1 o'clock. And until then, thank you, everyone. Have a good evening here, and we'll all see you tomorrow.